I hope you don't decide to shoot that thing off in here, Augustus said. It'd take the wall out if you did, not to mention us. I don't shoot yet, Bull said sullenly, keeping his options open. Call waited until Augustus filled his plate, since there would be no getting his attention until he had food before him. The young Irish boy had stopped crying and was putting away beans faster even than Augustus. Starvation was probably all that was wrong with him. I'm going to see if I can hire some hands, Call said. You better move them horses this afternoon. Move them where? Augustus asked. Upriver, as far as you want, Call said. These Irishmen have fine voices, Augustus remarked. It's a pity there ain't two more of them, we'd have a barbershop quartet. It would be a pity if you lost them horses while I'm off hiring hands, too, Call pointed out. Oh, you mean you want me to sleep out on the ground for several nights just to keep Pedro from stealing these horses back? I'm out of practice sleeping on the ground. What was you planning to sleep on the way to Montana?
Just give me 1 second, everyone. I have the camera back on. I'm just
there ain't many hotels between here and there. I hadn't been planning on going to Montana.
Nothing too serious.
That's your plan.
Some toast and
butter. I
butter.
may come if I feel like it, or you may change your mind. I know you never have changed your mind about anything yet, but there's a first time for everything. You'd argue with a stone, Call said. Just watch them horses. We may never get that lucky again. Call saw there was no point in losing any more time. If Augustus was not of a mind to be serious, nothing could move him. Jake did come back, didn't he? Augustus asked. His horse is here, Call said. I guess he'd probably come with it. You think he'll work once we start? No, and I won't either, Augustus said. You better hire these Irish boys while you got the chance. That's work we're looking for, Allen said. What we don't know, we'll gladly learn. Call refrained from comment. Men who didn't know how to get on and off a horse would not be much use around a cow outfit. Where are you going hiring? Augustus asked. I might go to the Rainies, Call said. Many boys as they got, they ought to be able to spare a few. I sparked Maud Rainey once upon a time, Augustus said, tilting back in his chair. If we hadn't had the Comanches to worry with, I expect I'd have married her. Her name was Grove before she was married. She lays them boys like hens lay eggs, don't she? Call left to keep from having to talk all day. Dietz was catching a short nap on the back porch, but he sat up when Call came out. Dish, Boget, and the boy were roping low bushes, Dish teaching the boy a thing or two about the craft of roping. That was good, since nobody around the Hat Creek outfit could rope well enough to teach him anything. Call himself could rope in an emergency, and so could P, but neither of them were ropers at the first class. Practice up, boys, he said. As soon as we gather some cattle, there's going to be a pile of roping to do. Then he caught his second-best horse, a sorrel gelding called Sunup, and headed northeast toward the brush country.
Chapter 13.
Lorena had stopped expecting ever to be surprised, least of all by a man, and then Jake Spoon walked in the door and surprised her. The surprise started the minute before he even spoke to her. Partly it was because he seemed to know her the minute he saw her. She had been sitting at a table expecting Dish Boget to come back with another $2 he had borrowed somewhere. It was an expectation that brought her no pleasure. It was clear Dish expected something altogether different from what the $2 would buy him. That was why, in general, she preferred older men to younger ones. The older ones were more likely to be content with what they paid for. The younger ones almost always got in love with her and expected it to make a difference. It got so she never said a word to the young men, thinking that the less she said, the less they would expect. Of course, they went right on expecting, but at least it saved her having to talk. She could tell Dish Boget was going to pester her as long as he could afford to. And when she heard boot heels and the jingle of spurs on the porch, she assumed it was him, coming back for a second round. Instead, Jake had walked in. Lippy gave a whoop and shook Jake's hand. Jake was polite and glad to see them, and took the trouble to ask their health and make a few jokes, but even before he had drunk the free drink, he had begun to make a difference in the way she felt. He had big, muddy brown eyes and a neat mustache that turned down at the corners. But of course, she had seen big eyes and mustaches before. What made the difference was that Jake was so at home and relaxed even after he saw her sitting there. Most men got nervous when they saw her, aware that their wives wouldn't like them being in the same room with her, or else made nervous by the thought of what they wanted from her, which they couldn't get without some awkward formalities of a sort that few of them could handle smoothly. But Jake was the opposite of nervous. Before he even spoke to her, he smiled at her several times in a most relaxed way. Not in the bragging way Tinkersley had when he smiled. Tinkersley's smile had said plainly enough that he felt she ought to be grateful for a chance to do whatever he wanted her to do. Of course, she was grateful to him for taking her away from Mosby and the smoke pots, but once she had been away for a while, she came to hate Tinkersley's smile. Lorena felt puzzled for a moment. She didn't ignore the men who walked through the door of the dry bean. It didn't do to ignore men. The majority of them were harmless, with nothing worse than a low capacity to irritate. They were worse than chiggers, but not as bad as bedbugs in her view. Still, there was no doubt that there were some mean ones who plain had it in for women, and it was best to try and spot those and take precautions. But as far as trusting the general run of men, there was no need, since she had no intention of ever expecting anything from one of them again. She didn't object to sitting in on a card game once in a while. She even enjoyed it, since making money at cards was considerably easier and more fun than doing it the other way. But a good game of cards once in a while was about as far as her expectations went. Immediately, Jake's spoon began to change the way her thinking worked. Before he even brought his bottle to the table to sit with her, she began to want him to. If he had taken the bottle and gone to sit by himself, she would have felt disappointed. But of course he didn't. He sat down and asked her if she'd like some refreshments, and looked right in her face for a while in a friendly, easygoing way. "My goodness," he said. "I never expected to find nobody like you here. We didn't see much beauty when I lived in these parts. Now, if this was San Francisco, I wouldn't be so surprised. I reckon that's where you really belong." It seemed a miracle to Lori that a man had walked in who could figure that out so quick. In the last year, she had begun to doubt her own ability to get to San Francisco, and even to doubt that it was as cool and nice as she had been imagining it to be. And yet she didn't want to give up the notion, because she had no other notion to put in its place. It might be silly even to think about it, but it was the best she had. Then Jake came along and right away mentioned exactly the right place. Before the afternoon was over, she laid aside her caution and her silence and told Jake more about herself than she had ever told anyone. Jake said very little, though he patted her hand from time to time and poured her a drink when her glass was empty. Once in a while he would say, "My goodness," or "That damn dog.
Hey, Tommy, how you doing, bro?
But mostly he just looked
Good
friendly
evening,
and confident.
Just about to roll one up and then do a couple
When she
dabs.
got through with her story, he explained that he had killed a dentist in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and was a wanted man, but that he had had hopes of eluding the law, and if he did, he would certainly try to see that she got to San Francisco, where she belonged. The way he said it made a big impression on Lori. A sad tone came into his voice from time to time, as if it pained him to have to remember that mortality could prevent him from doing her such a favor. He sounded like he expected to die, and probably soon. It wasn't a whine either, just a low note off his tongue and a look in his eye. It didn't interrupt for a minute his ability to enjoy the immediate pleasures of life. It gave Lori the shivers when Jake talked like that, and made her feel that she wanted to play a part in keeping him alive. She was used to men thinking they needed her desperately just because they wanted to get their carrots in her, or wanted her to be their girl for a few days or weeks. But Jake wasn't asking for anything like that. He just let her see that he felt rather impermanent and might not be able to carry out all that he wished. Lorena wanted to help him. She was surprised, but the feeling was too strong to deny. She didn't understand it, but she felt it. She knew she had a force inside her, but her practice had been to save it entirely for herself. Men were always hoping she would bestow some of it on them, but she never had. Then, with little hesitation, she began to offer it to Jake. He was a case. He didn't ask for help, but he knew how to welcome it. She was the one who suggested they go upstairs. On the way up, she noticed that Jake was favoring one foot. Turned out one of his ankles had been broken years before when a horse fell on him. The ankle was apt to swell if he had to ride hard for long stretches, as he had just done. She had helped him ease his boot off and got him some hot water and Epsom salts. After he had soaked his foot for a while, he looked amused, as if he had just thought of something pleasant. You know, if there was a tub around here, I'd just have a bath and trim my mustache, he said. There was a wash tub sitting on the back porch. Lorena carried it up when she needed a bath, and the 6 or 8 buckets of water it took to fill it. Lorena offered to get the wash tub since Jake had one boot off, but he wouldn't hear her. He took the other boot off and limped down by himself and got the tub. Then he bribed Lippy to heat up some water. It took a while since the water had to be heated on a cook stove. Why, Jake, you could buy a bath from the Mexican barber for 10 cents, Lippy pointed out.
Tab in there real quick.
That'd be true, but I prefer the company in this establishment, Jake said. Lorena thought that maybe he would want her to leave the room while he bathed, since so far he had treated her modestly, but he had nothing like that in mind. He latched her door so Lippy couldn't pop in and catch a glimpse of something it wasn't his business to see. Lippy will eye the girls, Jake said. No news to Lorena. I wished it was a bigger tub, he said. We could have us a wash together. Lorena had never heard of such a thing. It surprised her how coolly Jake stripped off for his wash. Like all men who weren't pure gamblers, he was burned brown on his face, neck, and hands, and was fish white on the rest of his body. Most of her customers were brown to their collar and white below. The great majority of them were reluctant to show anything of their bodies, though it was bodies they had come to satisfy. Some wouldn't even unbuckle their belts. Lorena often made them wait while she undressed. If she didn't, whatever she was wearing got messed up. Also, she liked undressing in front of the men because it scared them. A few would get so scared that they had to back out of the whole business, though they always scrupulously paid her and apologized and made excuses. They came in thinking they wanted to persuade her out of her clothes, but when she matter-of-factly took them off, it often turned the tables. Gus was an exception, of course. He liked her naked and he liked her clothes. Seeing one body would remind him of other bodies, and he would sit on the bed and scratch himself and talk about various aspects of women that only he would have had anything to say about. The varieties of bosoms, for example. Jake Spoon wasn't as talkative as Gus, but he was just as immodest. He sat happily in the tub until the water got cold. He even asked if she'd like to give him a haircut. She didn't mind trying, but quickly saw that she was making a mess of it and stopped with only a small portion of his curly black hair removed. Once he toweled himself off, he turned and led her to the bed. He stopped before he got there and looked as though he was going to offer her money. Lorena had wondered if he would, and when he stopped, she turned quickly so he could undo the long row of buttons down the back of her dress. She felt impatient. Not for the act, but for Jake to go ahead and assume responsibility for her. She had never supposed that she would want such a thing from a man. But she was not bothered by the fact that she had changed her mind in the space of an hour, or that she was a little drunk when she changed it. She felt confident that Jake Spoon would get her out of Lonesome Dove, and she didn't intend to allow money to pass between them, or anything else that might cause him to leave without her. Jake immediately stepped over and helped her undo the buttons. It was plain she wasn't the first woman he had undressed, because he even knew how to unhook the dress at the neck, something most of her customers would never have thought of. You've had this one a while, I reckon, he said, looking rather critically at the dress once he got it off her. That too surprised her. for no man had ever commented favorably or unfavorably upon her clothes, not even Tinkersley, who had given her money to buy the very dress Jake was holding, just a cheap cotton dress which was fraying at the collar. Lorena felt a touch of shame that a man would notice the fraying. She had often meant to make a new dress or two, that being the only way to get one in Lonesome Dove, but she was awkward with a needle and was still getting by on the dresses she had bought in San Antonio. In the months there, she had had several offers to go to San Antonio with men who would probably have bought her dresses, but she had always declined. San Antonio was in the wrong direction. She hadn't liked any of the men, and anyway, didn't really need new dresses. She was attracting more business than she wanted just wearing the old ones. Jake's comment had been mildly made, but it threw Lorena slightly off. She realized he was a finicky man. She could not get away with being lazy about herself any longer. A man who noticed a frayed collar with a near-naked woman standing right in front of him was a new kind of a man to Lorena. One who would soon notice other things, some perhaps more serious than a collar. She felt disheartened. Some glow had seeped from the moment. Probably he had already been to San Francisco and seen finer women than her. Perhaps when it came time to leave, he wouldn't want to bother with someone so ill-dressed. Perhaps the surprise that had walked into her life would simply walk back out of it. Her sinking confidence was only momentary. Jake put the dress aside and watched her draw her shift off over her head, and he sat beside her when she lay down. He was perfectly at ease. "Well, Laura, you take the prize," he said. "I had not a hope of being this lucky when I headed back here. You're as fine as flowers." When he began to stroke her, she noticed that his hands were like a woman's, his fingers small and his fingernails clean. Tinkersley had had clean fingernails, but Jake wasn't arrogant like Tinkersley, and he gave the impression of having nothing but time. Most men crawled on top of her at once, but Jake just sat on the bed, smiling at her. And when he smiled, her confidence returned. With most men, there was a moment when they moved their eyes away, but Jake kept looking at her right in the eye. He looked at her so long that she began to feel shy. She felt more naked than she had ever felt. When he bent to kiss her, she flinched. She did not laugh. Jake merely grinned when she flinched, as if her shyness was funny. His breath was as clean as his hands. Many a sour breath had roughed her hair and her nostrils, but Jake's was neither rank nor sour. It had a clean, cedary flavor to it. When it was over, Jake took a nap, and instead of getting up and dressing, Lori lay with him, thinking. She thought of San Francisco, and just thinking about it made her think that she could do anything. She didn't even feel like moving to wipe the sheets. Let them be. She would be going soon. When Jake woke, he looked at her and grinned. His hand, warm now, went right back to work. "If I ain't careful, I'm apt to sprout up again," he said. Lorena wanted to ask him why his breath smelled like cedar, but she didn't know if she ought, since he had just come to town. But then she asked him, a little shocked at hearing her own voice make the question. "Why, I passed a cedar grove and cut myself some toothpicks," Jake said. "Nothing that sweetens the breath like a cedar toothpick, unless it's mint. And mint don't grow in these parts." Then he kissed her again, as if to make her a present of his sweet breath. Between kisses, he talked to her about San Francisco and what might be the best route to take, even after he slid between her legs again and made the old bed spring whine and the sorry mattress crackle. He kept talking a little. When he finally got up and stretched and suggested they go downstairs, Lorena felt more cheerful than she had for years. Xavier and Lippy, who were used to her long sulks, hardly knew what to think. Neither did Dish Bogat, who happened to walk in. Dish sat down and drank a bottle of whiskey before anybody noticed. Then he got to singing, and everybody laughed at him. Lorena laughed as loud as Lippy, whose lip waved like a flag when he was amused. Only later, when Jake left to ride south with Captain Call, did Lorena feel impatient. She wanted Jake to come back. The time with him had been so relaxed it almost seemed like a wakeful dream of some kind. She wanted to have the dream again. That night, when a skinny cowboy named Jasper Fant came in from the river and approached her, Lori just stared at him silently until he got embarrassed and backed off, never having actually said a word. Staring was all she had to do. Jasper consulted with Lippy, and by the end of the week, all the cowboys along the river knew that the only sporting woman in Lonesome Dove had abruptly given up the sport.
Chapter 14.
When Jake finally came ambling to the house, having spent the better part of the day asleep and lying in bed, Augustus was already mumbling his jug from time to time. He was sitting on the front porch, waving off flies and watching the two Irishmen, who were sleeping as if dead under the nearest wagon. They had gone to sleep in the wagon's meager shade. The shade had moved, but not the Irishman. The boy had no hat. He slept with his arm across his face. Jake didn't even glance at them as he walked past, a fact that Augustus noted. Jake had never been renowned for his interest in people, unless the people were whores. "Where's Call?" Jake asked when he got to the porch. "You didn't expect to find Woodrow Call sitting in the shade, did you?" Augustus asked. "That man was born to work." "Yes, and you was born to talk to him," Jake said. "I need to borrow $10. "Oh," Augustus said. "Has Lori upped her rates?" Jake ignored the question, which was only meant to rile him, reached for the jug. "No, the girl's as generous as a preacher's widow," Jake said. "She wouldn't take money from a gentleman like me. I hope she charged you plenty, though, for I know you've been there before me." "I've always tried to keep a step ahead of you, Jake," Augustus said. "But to answer your question, Call's gone to round up a darn bunch of cowboys so we can head out for Montana with a darn bunch of cows and suffer for the rest of our lives." "Well, darn," Jake said. "I admit I was a fool to mention it." He settled himself on the lower step and set the jug halfway between them so they could both reach it. He was mildly chagrined that Call had left before he could borrow the money. Extracting money from Augustus had always been a long and wearisome business. Call was easier when it came to money. He didn't like to lend it, but he would rather lend it than talk about it, whereas Augustus would rather talk than do anything. Also, it was bothersome that Call had seized on the idea of Montana so abruptly, though it had always been his view that if you could just hit Call with the right idea, he would apply his energies and make a fortune, which he might then share with a man who brought along the idea. Now that he was back, though, he wouldn't mind spending a few warm, idle months in Lonesome Dove. Laura was more of a beauty than he expected to find. Her room over the saloon wasn't much, but it was better accommodation than they could expect on the way to Montana. As usual, though, life moved faster than he had intended it to. Call would come back with a lot of cowboys, and he would practically have to marry Lori in order to get out of going up the trail. Then, even if he did set his foot down and stay in Lonesome Dove, who knew but what some lawman from Fort Smith would show up and drag him off to hang? Just as he had been in the mood to slow down, his own loose mouth had gotten him in trouble. "Maybe he won't find no cattle to drive, or no hands neither," he suggested, knowing it was wishful thinking. "He'll find the cattle, and if he can't find the hands, he'll drive them himself. Make us help him." Jake tipped his hat back and said nothing. The blue show wandered around the corner of the house and stood there looking at him, which for some reason Jake found peculiarly irritating. Gus and his pig were aggravating company. "I ought to shoot that pig right betwixt the eyes," he said, feeling more irritable the longer he sat. There was not much good in anything that he could see. Either it was back to Montana and probably get scalped, or stay in Texas and probably get hung. If he wasn't careful, the girl would get restless and actually expect him to take her to San Francisco. The main problem with women was that they were always wanting something like San Francisco, and once they began to expect it, they would get testy if it didn't happen. They didn't understand that he talked of pleasant things in faraway places just to create a happy prospect that they could look forward to for a while. It wasn't meant to really happen, and yet women never seemed to grasp that. He had been in ticklish spots several times, and their disappointment turned to anger. It was something how mad women could get. Was you ever threatened by a woman, Gus? He asked, thinking about it. No, not what you'd call threatened, Augustus said. I was hit with a stove lid once or twice. Why? Jake asked. Why, no reason, Augustus said. If you live with Mexicans, you expect to eat beans sooner or later. Who said anything about Mexicans? Jake said, exasperated. Gus was the darndest talker. Augustus chuckled. You was always slow to see the point, Jake, he said. If you fool with women, you'll get hit by a stove lid sooner or later. Whereas if you live with Mexicans, you'll have to expect beans in your diet. I'd like to see the woman can hit me with a stove lid, Jake said. I will take an insult once in a while, but I'd be damned if I'd take that. Laura's apt to hit you with worse if you try to wiggle out of taking her to San Francisco, Augustus said, delighted that an opportunity had arisen to catch Jake out so early in his visit. Jake let that one float. Of course, Gus would know all about the girl. Not that it took brains to know about women. They spread their secrets around like honey in a fly trap. Of course, Lori would want to go to San Francisco. By common agreement, the prettiest town in the West. Augustus stood up and lifted his big pistol off the back of his chair. I guess we ought to wake up them Irishmen before they bake, he said. He walked over and kicked at their feet for a while until they began to stir. Finally, Alan O'Brien sat up looking groggy. Lord, it's warm, ain't it? He said. Why, this is spring, son, Augustus remarked. If you're looking for warm, come back on the 4th of July. We usually thaw out by then. When he was sure both Irishmen were awake, he went back into the house and came out with his rifle. Well, let's go, he said to Jake. Go where? Jake asked. I just got set down. To hide them horses, Augustus said. Pedro Flores is no quitter. He'll be coming. Jake felt sour. He wished again that circumstances hadn't prompted him to come back. He had already spent one full night on horseback, and now the boys were expecting him to spend another. All on account of a bunch of livestock he had no interest in the first place. I don't know if I'm coming, he said. I just got here. If I'd known you boys did nothing but chouse horses around all night, I don't know that I would have come. Why, Jake, you lazy bean, Augustus said, and walked off. Jake had a stubborn streak in him, and once it was activated, even Call could seldom do much with him. The Irish boy was standing up, trying to get the sleep out of his eyes. Come on, boys, Augustus said. Time to ride the river. Hey, you want us to ride some more? Sean asked. He had rolled over during his nap and had grass burrs in his shirt. You'll soon catch on to riding, Augustus said. It's easier than you might think. Or do you have any mules? Sean asked. I'm better at riding mules. Son, we're fresh out, Augustus said. Can either you boys shoot? No, but we can dig potatoes, Alan said. He didn't want the man to think that they were totally incompetent. You boys took the wrong ship, Augustus said. I doubt there's 10 spuds in this whole country. He caught them the gentlest horses out of the small bunch that were still penned, taught them how to adjust their stirrups so their feet wouldn't dangle. He hadn't had time for that refinement in Sabinas. Just then, Jake came walking along, a Winchester in the crook of his arm. No doubt he had concluded that it would be easier to stay up all night than to explain to Call why he hadn't. Soon the Irishmen were mounted and were cautiously walking their mounts around the pen. It's new to them, but they are a quick-witted race, Augustus said. One more week and they'll be riding like Comanches. I don't know that I'll pause a week, Jake said. You boys have got hard to tolerate. I might take that yellow-haired gal and mosey off to California. Jake, you're a darn grasshopper, Augustus said. You ride in yesterday talking Montana, and today you're talking California. Once the Irishmen had got fairly competent at mounting and dismounting, Augustus gave them each a Winchester and made them shoot at a cactus a time or two. You got to learn sometime, he said. If you can learn to ride and shoot before Captain Call gets back, he might hire you. The O'Brien boys were so awed to find themselves with deadly weapons in their hands that they immediately forgot to be nervous about their horses. John had never held a gun before, and the flat crack of a bullet when he shot the cactus was frightening. It occurred to him that if they were expected to shoot, they could also expect to be shot at, an unappealing thought. "Do we ask their names before we shoot them?" he inquired. "It ain't necessary," Augustus assured. "Most of them are named Jesus anyway." "Well, I ain't named Jesus," Jake said. "You boys try and not do your learning in my direction. I've been known to get riled when I'm shot at." When the two Irishmen came trotting up to the horse herd behind Augustus and Jake, Dish Bogat could hardly believe his eyes. He had always heard that the Hat Creek outfit was peculiar, but arming men who didn't even know how to dismount from their horses was not so peculiar as insane. Augustus took the lead on a big white horse named Puddinfoot, and Jake Spoon followed him. Jake looked sour as clabber, which suited Dish fine. Maybe Lorena hadn't fallen quite in love with him after all. Dish rode over and poked Nuke, who was asleep on his horse. Dish himself had napped from time to time, the day being hot and the horse herd placid. "You ought to see what's coming," he said. "Gus has put them darn midgets a horseback." Newt had a hard time getting his eyes open. As soon as the chase was over, sleep had begun trying to pull him down. If Pedro Flores had ridden up and offered to shoot him, he didn't think he would much care, since it would at least mean more sleep. He knew cowboys were supposed to be able to stay in the saddle 2 or 3 days at a stretch without sleep, but he was guiltily aware that he had not yet learned the trick. When Dish poked him, his hat fell off, and when he got down to get it, his legs felt as heavy as if somebody had put lead in his boots. He would have liked to say something to Sean O'Brien, who looked as tired as he was, but he couldn't think of a word to say. Augustus, who had no chance to examine Call's big catch, rode into the herd and eased through to the other side, where Dietz and P were waiting. He took his time about it, giving the animals critical inspection as he went past. Not more than 40 of them struck him as prime mounts. A lot were undersized, some had saddle sores, and a whole bunch of them were skinny from overwork or underfeeding, or probably no feeding. Except for a prize stud or two, Pedro Flores had probably never wasted an oat on a horse in his life. "These nags is barely worth a night's sleep," he said to Dietz and P.
Hell yeah.
"If we was aiming to start a soap factory, they might do. But so far as I know, we ain't.
They
I have a
wasn't too
notion
bad.
to keep
Can't
the best
complain
50
much.
and run the rest off." "My Lord," P said, aghast at what Gus had suggested. "The captain would shoot all of us if we run off any of these things." "I don't doubt he'd foam at the mouth," Augustus said. "What do you think, Dietz?" "They're skinny," Dietz said. "Might get fat if we give them enough time." "You might grow wings if I give you enough time," Augustus said. They looked across the river.
Hell yeah.
The sun was slipping fast. In an hour or
It
two,
wasn't
they
too
could
bad
expect
weather
a
here.
loud visit.
Wasn't too warm,
"Here's the plan," he said.
so that was a good thing.
"Pedro won't bother coming to town, knowing our habits like he does. We'll pin the prime stock and hide the skinny little rabbits up in some thicket. Then if we don't like the looks of his army, we can skedaddle and let him drive his own soap factory back home." P.I. felt deeply uneasy about the plan. When the captain was around, things were done in a more straightforward fashion. Gus was always coming up with something sly. However, P's opinion hadn't been asked. He watched as Gus and Dietz began to cut the herd. Soon Dish Bogat figured out what was happening and rode over to help him. Dish was always a willing hand, except when it came to digging wells. Jake sat with the boy and the Irishman and watched the proceedings without much interest. He had himself a smoke, but didn't offer anybody else one. Newt watched too, trying to decide if he ought to go help. Mr. Gus, Dietz, and Dish were doing the work so efficiently he decided he'd just be in the way. So he stayed put, hoping that Jake would say something to him. But there had been no chance to renew their friendship until Jake had come home. As sunset approached, Newt felt more and more anxious. Captain being gone always affected him that way. He knew Mr. Gus was supposed to be one of the coolest hands on the border, and he was confident Jake could handle practically anything that came up. But despite those two, he couldn't stop himself from feeling anxious when the captain was gone. Young Sean O'Brien felt anxious too.
Oh, shit.
Only his anxiety was of a different nature.
Got about half
The
of it. This is
prospect
the
of
roast
shooting
beef
and
one
being
there.
shot at had
I have
loomed
another one
larger
that's
and larger
regular.
in his thinking until he could think of little else. Since Newt looked friendly, he decided to seek his counsel on the matter. "What part of a man is best to shoot at?" he asked, addressing himself to me. Jake Spoon chuckled. "His horse," he said. "Just aim for his horse. There ain't many of them chili bellies that will bother you once they're afoot." With that, he touched the spurs to his horse and trotted around to the other side of the herd. "Is that right?" Sean asked. "You're supposed to shoot at the horse?" "If Jake says so, it's right," Newt said loyal, though the advice had surprised him too. "Have you shot many?" Sean asked. Newt shook his head. "Nope," he said. "Last night was the first time I even got to go. I never even shot at a man, or a horse either." "You shoot the horse," Sean said when his brother Alan rode up. Alan said nothing. He was thinking of his little wife, Sari, whom he had left in Ireland. She had wept for weeks before he left, thinking it wrong that he should leave her. He had got his dander up and left anyway, and yet now he missed her so that tears as wet as hers sprang from his eyes almost every time he thought of her. Though normally a cheerful, even a merry man, the absence of Sari had affected him more than he had supposed anything could. In his mind's eye, he saw her small, red-headed figure moving through the chores of the day, now cooking spuds, now bringing milk from the tired teat of their old milk cow. He ignored all talk when he was thinking of Sari, refusing to let it distract him. How would she feel if he could know what he'd gotten himself into, sitting on a horse with a heavy gun beneath his leg? On the other side of the herd, Augustus had finished separating out the packs and was about to divide up the crew. Neats and Dish were holding the cart at a little distance from the main herd. "Well, girls," Augustus said, "might as well take these nags in and put them to bed. Me and this fine bunch of hands will ease the others upriver." Dish Boket could hardly believe his good fortune. He had been braced for a scratch night of brush busting, but it seemed old Gus had a mind to spare him. "All right," he said. "Tell me what you want for supper, Gus. I'll go eat it for you once we get these pinned." Augustus ignored the sally. "Need you watch close," he said. "This young spark will probably have to go and get drunk, maybe married before the night's over." Dish waved and started the horses. Just as he did, Jake came loping over. "Where are they going?" he asked. "Back to town," Augustus said. "Be the safest place for the good stock, I figured." "Why, damn," Jake said, plain chagrin. "You could have sent me back. I'm the one that's worn to a frazzle." "Somebody's got to help me protect these boys," Augustus said. "As I recall, you made a name for yourself by shooting Mexican bandits. I thought you'd welcome the chance to polish your reputation a little." "I'd rather shoot you," Jake said, pretty gruffly. "You caused me more hell than all the bandits in Mexico." "Now, Jake, be fair," Augustus said. "You was just hoping to go back and get your bean and that girl again. I feel young Dish should have his shot before you ruin her completely." Jake said. The young cowboy was the least of his worries. "If you like these Irishmen so much, you watch them," he said. "Send me little Newt. We'll take one side. Are we supposed to be going anywhere in particular?" "No," Augustus said. "Just try and keep them out of Mexico." He waved at Newt, who soon came loping over. "Son, Jake Spoon has requested your help," he said. "If you and him watch the east, me and P and the shortcakes will take the west." The boy's face lit up as if he had just been given a new saddle. He had practically worshipped Jake Spoon once, and would clearly be willing to again, given the encouragement. Augustus felt a momentary pang. He liked Jake, but he felt him to be too leaky a vessel to hold so much hope. Then all vessels leak to some degree. Will we just keep riding, or will we stop and wait for the Mexicans? Newt asked, anxious to know the right thing to do. Keep riding, Augustus said. Let them catch us if they're men enough. And if they do, try not to shoot up all your ammunition. We might need some tomorrow. With that, he turned, and in a few minutes, with the inexpert help of the Irishman, got 100 horses moving north in the fading light.
Chapter 15.
The minute they got the herd pinned, Dish felt himself getting restless. He had a smoke, leaning on the gate of the big corral. He knew that he had a clear duty to stay with the horses, though the darky was obviously a superior hand. He could hardly be expected to hold the place against the swarm of bandits. The problem was that Dish could not believe in the swarm of bandits. Under the red afterglow, the town was still as a church. Now and then there was a bleat of a goat, call of a bull bat, but that was all. It was so peaceful that Dish soon convinced himself that there was no real need for two men to waste the whole evening in a dusty corral. The bandits were theoretical, but Lorena was real, and only 200 yards away. Leaning on the gate, Dish had no trouble imagining favorable possibilities. Jake Spoon was only human, and he was oversure of that. He might have rushed the suit. Dish could understand it. He would have rushed one himself, had he known how. Perhaps Lori had not welcomed such boldness. Perhaps she had recognized that Jake was not a man to depend on. By the time he had mulled over the prospect for 30 minutes, Dish was in a fever. He had to have another shot or else carry some sharp regrets with him up the trail. Some might think it irresponsible. Captain Call, for one, certainly would. But he could not stand all night in chunking distance of Lorena and not go see her. Well, it all looks safe, he said to Dietz, who had seated himself against the big water trough, his rifle across his lap. Quiet so far, Dietz agreed. I reckon it'll be some while before anything happens, if anything does, he said. I believe I'll just stroll over to the saloon and bathe my throat. Yes, sir, you go along, Dietz said. I can look after the stock. You just shoot if you need help, Dietz said. I'll get back here in a minute if there's trouble. He took his horse so he wouldn't be caught afoot in the event of trouble and went trotting off. Dietz was just as glad to see him leave. The young man's restlessness made him an uncomfortable companion. It was not a restlessness other men could talk to. Only a woman could hear it. Dietz had had such restlessness once, and had no woman to cure it. But years and hard work had worn the edge off of him, and he could relax and enjoy the quiet of the night, if he was let alone. He liked sitting with his back against the water trough, listening to the horses settling themselves. From time to time, one would come to the trough and drink, sucking the water into its mouth in long draws. Across the pen, two horses were stamping and snorting nervously, but Dietz didn't get up to go look. Probably it was just a snake that had snaked too close to the pen. A snake wasn't going to fool with horses if it could help it. The possibility of attack didn't worry him, even if a few vaqueros did make it past into town. They would be nervous, sure of being outgunned. He could sleep. He had the knack of going in and out of sleep easily and quickly, but despite the long night and day, he wasn't sleepy. Relaxing at times was as good as sleeping. A sleeping man would miss the best of the evening, and the moonrise as well. Dietz had always been partial to the moon, watched it often, thought about it much. To him, it was a more interesting and a more affecting thing than the sun, which shone on every day in much the same fashion. But the moon changed, moved around the sky, and waxed and waned. On the nights when it rose full and yellow over the plains around Lonesome, it seemed so close that a man could almost ride over with a ladder and step right on it. And Dietz had even imagined doing it a few times, propping a ladder against the old full moon, stepping on it. If he did it, one thing was sure, Mr. Gus would have something to talk about for a long time. Dietz had to grin at the mere thought of how excited Mr. Gus would get if he took off and rode the moon, for he thought of it like a ride. something he might just do for a night or two when things were slow. Then, when the moon came back close to Lonesome Dove, he'd step off and walk back home. It would surprise them all. Other times, though, the moon rose so high that Dietz had to come to his senses and admit that no man could really ride. When he imagined himself up there on the thin little hook that hung above him, white as a tooth, he almost got dizzy from his own imagining and had to try harder to pay attention to what was happening on the ground. Still, when there was nothing to see around him but a few horses sucking water, he could always rest himself by watching the moon in the sky. He loved clear nights and hated clouds. When it was cloudy, he felt deprived of half the world. His fear of Indians, which was deep, was tied to his sense that the moon had powers that neither white men nor black men understood. He had heard Mr. Gus talk about the moon moving the waters, and though he had glimpsed the ocean many times by the Matagorda, he had not been able to get a sense of how the moon moved it. But he was convinced that Indians understood the moon. He had never talked with an Indian about it, but he knew they had more names for it than white people had, and that suggested a deeper understanding. The Indians were less busy and would naturally have more time to study such things. It had always seemed to Dietz that it was lucky for the whites that the Indians had never gained full control over the moon. He had dreamed once, after the terrible battle of Fort Phantom Hill, that the Indians had managed to move the moon over by one of those little low hills that were all over West Texas. And they had got it to pause by the edge of the mountain so they could leap their horses onto it. It still occurred to him at times that such a thing might have happened, and that there were Comanches or possibly Kiowa riding around on the moon. Often when the moon was full and yellow and close to the earth, he got the strong feeling that Indians were on it. It was a fearful feeling, one he had never discussed with any man. The Indians hated the whites, and if they got control of the moon, which was said to control the waters, then terrible things might happen. The Indians could have the moon suck all the water out of the wells and rivers, or else turn it all to salt like the ocean. That would be the end, and a hard end at that. But when the moon was just a little white hook, Dietz tended to lose his worries. After all, water was still sweet, except for an alkaline river or two like the Pecos. Perhaps if the Indians got on the moon, they had fallen off. Sometimes Dietz wished that he could have had some schooling, so as to maybe learn the answers to some of the things that puzzled and intrigued him. Night and day itself was something to ponder. There had to be a reason for the sun to fall, lie hidden, and then rise again from the opposite side of the plain, and other reasons for the rain, thunder, slicing north wind. He knew the big motions of nature weren't accidents. It was just that his life had not given him enough information to grasp the way of things. And yet the Indians, who could not even talk a normal language, seemed to understand more about it even than Mr. Gus, who could talk a passel about the motions of nature or anything else you wanted to hear talked about. Mr. Gus had even tried to tell him the world was round, though Dietz regarded that as just joking talk. But it was Mr. Gus who put his name on the sign so that everyone who could read would realize that he was a part of the outfit. It made up for a lot of joking. Dietz rested happily by the water trough, now and then glancing at the moon. The ground shadows hid him completely, and any vaquero foolish enough to try and slip in would get a sharp surprise. Dish himself got something of a surprise when he walked into the dry-bean, for Lorena was not alone, as he had been imagining her to be. She sat at a table with Jasper Fant, a skinny little waddy from upriver. Dish had met Jasper once or twice and rather liked him, though at this time he would have liked him a lot better if he'd stayed upriver where he belonged. Jasper had a sickly look to him, but in fact was as healthy as the next man and had an appetite to rival Gus McCrae's. "There's Dish," Lorena said, when he came in the door. "Now we can have a game." Lippy, as usual, was kibitzing, putting in his 2 cents worth, whether they were wanted or not. "Not unless he's been to the bank, we can't," he said. "Don't mean he can't take a hand," Jasper said, giving Dish a friendly nod. "We all got weaknesses," Lippy observed. "Wants is playing poker for credit. That's why he can't afford to pay his piano player an honest wage." Xavier endured these witticisms silently. He was in a worse mood than usual, and he knew why. Jake Spoon had come to town and promptly deprived him of a whore, an asset vital to an establishment such as his in an out-of-way place like Lonesome Dove. Many a traveler who might not ordinarily come that far would because of Lori. There was no woman like her on the border. She was not friendly, but because of her, men came and stayed to drink away the night. He would not be likely to get another such whore. There were Mexican women as pretty, but few cowboys would ride the extra miles for a Mexican woman, those being plentiful in most parts of South Texas. Besides, he himself bought Lori once a week, if not more. Once in a period of restless enthusiasm, he had bought her 6 times in 5 days, after which, being ashamed of his extravagance, if not his lust, he abstained for 2 weeks. It was a happy convenience having Lori in the place, and a fine change from his wife, Teresa, who had been stingy with her favors and a bully to boot. Once Teresa had denied him anything resembling a favor for a period of 4 months, which was a painful thing. He had been required to hunt Mexican women himself during that period, and had come close to feeling the wrath of a couple of Mexican husbands. By contrast, Lori was restful, and he had come to love her. She did not exhibit the slightest fondness for him, but neither did she raise the slightest objection when he felt like buying her. A fact Lippy was deeply resentful of. She refused to be bought by Lippy at any price. Now Jake Spoon had spoiled it all, and the only way Xavier could vent his annoyance was by winning money from Jasper Fant, most of which he could never collect. "Where's Jake?" Lori asked, a shock to Dish. His hopes, which had been soaring as he walked through the dark to the saloon, flopped down to boot level. For her to inquire about the man so shamelessly bespoke a depth of attachment that Dish could barely imagine. It was not likely she would ever inquire at all about him, even if he stepped out the door and vanished for a year. "Why, Jake's with Gus and the boys," he said, sitting down to make the best face of it he could. It was not much of a face, for Lori had never seemed prettier to him. She had pushed up the sleeves of her dress, and when it came her turn to handle the cards, her white arms all but mesmerized him. He could hardly think to bet for watching Lori's arms and her firm lips. Her arms were plumpish, but more graceful than any Dish had ever seen. He could not think of what he was doing. He wanted her so much, it cost him to play so badly that in an hour he had lost 3 months' wages. Jasper Fant fared no better. Whether from love of Lori or lack of skill, Dish didn't know. Didn't know and didn't care. All he was conscious of was that somehow he would have to outlast Jake, for there could be no woman for him except the one across the table. The very friendliness with which she treated him stung like a scorpion bite, for there was nothing special in it. She was almost as friendly to Lippy, a pure fool with a hole in his stomach to boot. The card game soon became a torture for everyone but Lori, who had won hand after hand. It pleased her to think how surprised Jake would be when he came back and saw her winnings. He would know she wasn't helpless, at least. She had always liked playing cards and liked it even better now that it was all she had to do until Jake came back. She even liked Dish, Jasper, a little. It was a relief not to have to hold herself out of the fun because of what they wanted. She knew they felt hopeless, but then she had felt hopeless enough times, waiting for them to work up their nerve or else borrow $2. Let them get a taste. "Dish, we might as well stop," Jasper said. "We'll barely get out of debt this year as it is." "I'll take a hand," Lippy said. "I might be rusty, but I'm willing." It was a house rule that Lippy was not allowed to gamble. His style was extravagant and his resources meager. Several times his life had been endangered when strangers discovered he had no means of paying them the sums that he had just lost. But Xavier had lost faith in house rules, since it had always been a house rule that Lorena was a whore, and now she wasn't anymore. If a whore could retire so abruptly, Lippy might as well play cards. "What's he going to pay me with when I win?" Lorena asked. "Sweet music," Lippy said cheerfully. "I'll play your favorite song." It was not much enticement, Lorena thought, since he played her favorite songs every time she came in the room as it was, hoping his skill at the keyboard would finally move her to let him buy a poke. She wasn't about to start that. She did play him a few hands. The cowboys were too sunk to even drink. The boy said goodnight to her politely, hoping she would think kindly of him, but she didn't. Boys didn't interest her as much as cards. Outside, Jasper paused in the street and had a smoke with Dish. "Hired on yet?" Jasper asked. He had a mustache no thicker than a shoestring, and a horse that was not much thicker than the mustache. "I think so," Dish said. "I'm working for these Hat Creek boys right now. They're thinking of getting up a drive." "You mean they hire you to play cards?" Jasper asked. He fancied himself a joker. "Oh, I was just resting," Dish said. "I'm helping their darky guard some stock." "Guard it from what?" "From the Mexicans we stole it from," Dish said. "Captain went off to hire a crew." "Hell," Jasper said. "If the Mexicans knew the captain was gone, they'd come and take back Texas." "I reckon not," Dish said. He felt the remark was slightly insulting. The captain was not the only man in Texas who could fight. "He can hire me if he wants to when he gets back," Jasper said. "He probably will," Dish said. Jasper had a reputation for being reliable, if not brilliant. Though aware that Dish might be touchy on the subject, Jasper was curious about what had happened to change Lori so. He looked wishfully at the light in her window. "Has that girl got married or what?" he asked. "Every time I jingle my money, she looked at me like she was ready to carve my liver." Dish resented the question. It was not so coarse as to enjoy discussing Lori with just any man who happened to ask. On the other hand, it was hard to see Jasper Fant as a rival. He looked half-starved and probably was. "It's a scoundrel named Jake Spoon," Dish said. "I reckon he's beguiled her." "Oh, so that's it," Jasper said. "I believe I've heard the name. A pistolero some kind, ain't he?" "I wouldn't know what he is," Dish said in a tone that was meant to let Jasper know he had no great interest in discussing the matter further. Jasper took the hint, and the two of them rode over to the Hat Creek pens in silence, their minds on the white-armed woman in the saloon. She was no longer unfriendly, but it seemed to both of them that things had gone a little better before the change.
Chapter 16.
By the end of the first day's hiring, Call had collected 4 boys, none of them yet 18. Young Bill Spettle, the one they called Swift Bill, was no older than Newt, and his brother Pete only a year older than Bill. So desperate were their family circumstances that Call was almost hesitant to take them. The widow Spettle had a brood of 8 children, Bill and Pete being the oldest. Ned Spettle, the father of Maul, had died of drink 2 years before. It looked to Call as if the family was about to starve out. They had a little creek bottom farm not far north of Pickles Gap, but the soil was poor and the family had little to eat but sowbelly and beans. The widow Spettle, however, was eager for him to take the boys and would hear no protest from Call. She was a thin woman with bitter eyes. Call had heard from someone that she had been raised rich in the East with servants to comb her hair and help her into her shoes when she got up. It might have just been a story, but it was hard for him to imagine a grown-up who would need to be helped into their own shoes. But even if part of it was true, she had come a long way down. Ned Spettle had never got around to putting a floor in the shack of a house he built. His wife was rearing 8 children on the bare dirt. He had heard it said that Ned had never got over the war, which might have explained it. Plenty hadn't. It accounted for the shortage of grown men of a certain age, that war. Call himself felt a kind of guilt at having missed it, though the work he and Gus had done on the border had been just as dangerous and just as necessary. "Take 'em," the widow Spettle said, looking at her boys as if she wondered why she'd borne them. "I reckon they'll work as hard as any." Call knew the boys had helped take a small herd to Arkansas. He paid the widow a month's wage for each boy, knowing she would need it. There was evidently not a shoe in the family. Even the mother was barefoot, a fact that must shame her, if the servant story was true. He didn't take the Spettle boys with him. for he had brought no spare horses. But the boys started at once for Lonesome Dove on foot, each of them carrying a blanket. They had one pistol between them, a Navy Colt with half its hammer knocked off. Though Call assured them that he would equip them well once they got to Lonesome Dove, they wouldn't leave the gun. "We've never shot any other gun," Swift Bill said, as if that meant they couldn't. When he took his leave, Mrs. Spettle and the 6 remaining children scarcely noticed him. They stood in the hot yard with a scrawny hen or two scratching around their bare feet, watching the boys and crying. The mother, who had scarcely touched her sons before they left, stood straight up and cried. 3 of the children were girls, but the other 3 were boys in their early teens, old enough at least to be of use to their mother. "We'll take good care of them," Call said, wasting words. The young girls hung onto the widow's frayed skirts and cried. Call rode on, though with a bad feeling in his throat. It was better that the boys go. There was not enough work for them there, and yet they were the pride of the family. He would take as good a care of them as he could, yet what did that mean, with a drive of 2,500 miles to make? He made the Rainey Ranch by sundown, a far more cheerful place than the Spettle homestead. Joe Rainey had a twisted leg, the result of an accident with a buckboard. He got around on one leg almost as fast as a healthy man. Call was not as fond of Maud, Joe's fat, red-faced wife, as Augustus was, but then he had to admit he was not as fond of any woman as Augustus was. Maud Rainey was built like a barrel, with a bosom as big as buckets and a voice that some claimed would make hair fall out. It was the general consensus around Lonesome Dove that if she and Augustus had married, their combined voices would have deafened whatever children they might have produced. She talked at the table like some men talked when they were driving mules. Still, she and Joe had managed to produce an even dozen children so far, 8 of them boys and all of them strapping. Among them, the Raineys probably ate as much food in one meal as the Spettles consumed in a week. As near as Call could determine, they all devoted most of their waking hours to either growing or butchering or catching what they ate. Augustus's blue pigs had been purchased from the Raineys, and they were the first thing Maud thought to inquire about when Call rode up. "Have you had that shoat yet?" Maud asked before he could even dismount. "No, we ain't," Call said. "I guess Gus is saving him for Christmas. Elsie just likes to talk to him." "Well, step down and have a wash at the bucket," Maud said. "I'm cooking one of that shoat's cousins right this minute." It had to be admitted that Maud Rainey set a fine table. Call had no sooner got his sleeves rolled up and his hands clean than supper began. Joe Rainey just had time to mumble a prayer before Maud started pushing around the cornbread. Call was faced with more meat than he had seen on one table since he could remember. Beefsteak, pork chops, chicken, venison, and a stew that appeared to contain squirrel and various less familiar meats. Maud got red in the face when she ate, as did everyone else at the table from the steam rising off their platters. "This is my varmint stew, Captain," Maud said. "Oh," he asked politely, "what kind of varmints?" "Whatever the dogs catch," Maud said. "Or the dogs themselves, if they don't manage to catch nothing. I won't support a lazy dog." "She put a possum in," one of the little girls said. "She seemed as full of mischief as her fat mother, who, fat or not, made plenty of mischief among the men of the area before she settled on Joe." "Now, Maggie, don't be giving away my recipes," Maud said. "Anyway, the captain's likely ate possum before." "At least it ain't goat," Call said, trying to make conversation. It was an unfamiliar labor, since at his own table he mostly worked at avoiding it. But he knew women liked to talk to their guests, and he tried to fit into the custom. "We've heard a rumor that Jake is back and on the run," Joe Rainey said. He wore a full beard, which at the moment was shiny with pork drippings. Joe had a habit of staring straight ahead. Though Call assumed he had a neck joint like other men, he had never seen him use it. If you happened to be directly in front of him, Joe would look you in the eye, but if you were positioned a little to one side, his look went floating on by. "Yes, Jake arrived," Call said. "He's been to Montana and says it's the prettiest country in the world." "It's probably filled with women then," Maud said. I remember Jake. He can't find a woman, he gets so restless he'll scratch. Carl saw no need to comment on Jake's criminal status, if any. Fortunately, the Rainies were too busy eating to be very curious. The children, who had been well brought up, didn't try for the better meats, but made do with a platter of chicken, some fryback, and cornbread. One little tad, evidently the runt of the family, got nothing but cornbread and chicken gizzards, but he knew better than to complain. With 11 brothers and sisters, all bigger than him, complaint would have been dangerous. Well, what's Gus up to? Maud asked. I've been sitting here waiting for him to come over and try and take me away from Joe, but I don't guess he's coming. Has he still got his craving for buttermilk? Yes. He drinks it by the gallon, Carl said. I fancy it myself, so we compete. He felt Maud's statement not in the best of taste, but Joe Rainey continued to stare straight ahead and drip into his beard. Carl finally asked if he could hire a couple of boys. Maud sighed and looked down her double row of children. I'd rather sell pigs than hire out boys, she said. But I guess they've got to see the world sometime. What's the pay? Joe asked, always the practical man. Why, $40 and found, I reckon, Carl said. Of course, we'll furnish the mounts. That night, he slept in a wagon in the Rainey's yard. He had been offered a place in the loft, but it was piled so high with children that he hardly trusted himself in it. Anyway, he preferred the out-of-doors, though the out-of-doors at the Rainey's was more noisy than he was used to. The pigs grunted all night looking for lizards or something to eat. Then there was a barn owl that wouldn't stop calling, so he had a time getting to sleep. The next morning, he got a promise from Maud that her two oldest boys would get themselves to Lonesome Dove by the end of the week. The boys themselves, Jimmy and Ben Rainey, scarcely said a word. Carl rode off feeling satisfied, believing he had enough of a crew to start gathering cattle. Word would get out and a few more men would probably trickle in. They had to get the cattle and get them branded. At least they had the luxury of surplus horses.
Round 2 here.
Or did if Gus and Jake hadn't contrived to fiddle around and lose them. He worried about that possibility most of the way home. Not that Gus wasn't competent. So far as sheer ability went, Gus was as competent as any man he'd ever known. There had been plenty of times when he wondered if he himself could match Gus, if Gus really tried. It was a question that never got tested, because Gus seldom tried. As a team, the two of them were perfectly balanced. He did more than he needed to, while Gus did less. Gus himself often joked about it. If you got killed, I might work harder, he said. I might get in a righteous frame of mind if I had that stimulation, but you ain't killed, so what's the point? Carl wasted no time getting back, wishing all the way that he had the mare. She had spoiled him, made him too aware of the limitations of his other mounts. The fact that she was dangerous made him like her more. She made him extra watchful, which was good. When he got within 15 miles of Lonesome Dove, he cut west, thinking they would be holding the herd in that direction. He rode around the southern edge of the bad brush country, struck the trail of the horses. They had been going back south over their own tracks, which was curious. Gus had taken them back to town. Probably he had a reason, but it was not one Carl could guess, so he loped on home. When he approached the town, he saw the horses grazing upriver a little ways, with Dietz and Newt and the Irishman holding. They looked to be all there, so evidently nothing had happened. One thing about Gus McCrae, he was easily found. By 3 in the afternoon, any afternoon, he would be sitting on the porch, drawing occasionally from his jug. When Carl rode up, he was sitting there taking a nap. There was no sign of Jake. You're a fine guard, he said, dismounting. Augustus had his hat over his eyes, but he removed it and looked at Carl. How's Maud Rainey? He asked. She's in good health, Carl said. She fed me twice. Good thing it was just twice, Augustus said. If you'd stayed a week, you'd have had to rent an ox to get home on. She's anxious to sell you some more pigs, Carl said, taking the jug and rinsing his mouth with whiskey. If Joe was to get killed, I might court her again, Augustus speculated. I hope you will, Carl said. Them 12 young ones ought to have a good father. What are the horses doing back here so soon? Wild grazing, most likely, Augustus said. Didn't Pedro make a try? No, he didn't, and for a very good reason, Augustus said. And what reason would that be? Because he died, Augustus said. I swear, Carl said, stunned. Is that the truth? I ain't seen the corpse, but I imagine it's true. Jasper Fant rode in looking for work and had the news. Though the scamp didn't give it to me until I had wasted most of the night. I wonder what killed him, Carl said. Pedro Flores had been a factor in their lives off and on for 30 years, though probably they had not actually seen him more than 6 or 7 times. It was surprising hearing that he was gone, and though it should have been a relief, it wasn't exactly. It was too much of a surprise. Jasper wasn't up on the details, Augustus said. He just heard it from a vaquero. But I allow it's true because it explains why you could elope in with a boy and an idiot and saunter off with his remuda. And I swear, Carl said again, I never expected that. Oh, well, Augustus said. I never either. But then I don't know why not. Mexicans don't have no special dispensation. They die like the rest of us. I expect Bo will die one of these days. Then we won't have nobody to whack that dinner bell with a crowbar. Pedro was tough, though, Carl said. After all, the man had more or less held nearly 100-mile stretch of the border for nearly 30 years. Carl had known many men who died, but somehow had not expected it of Pedro, though he himself had fired several bullets at him. I'd like to know what took him. He might have choked on a pepper, Augustus said. Them that can't be killed by knives or bullets usually break their necks, falling off the porch or something. Remember Johnny Norvell dying of that bee sting? I guess Johnny had been shot 20 times, but a darn bee killed him. It was true. The man had rangered with them, and yet the bee sting had given him a seizure of some kind, and no one could bring him out of it. Well, it will about finish the Flores operation, Augustus said. He just had 3 boys, and we hung the only one of them, then he'd get up and go. To Augustus's surprise, Carl sat down on the porch and took a big swallow from the jug. He felt curious, not sick, but suddenly empty. It was the way a kick in the stomach would make you feel. It was an odd thing, but true, that the death of an enemy could affect you almost as much as the death of a friend. He had experienced it before, when news reached them that Kicking Wolf was dead. Some young soldier on his second patrol had made a lucky shot and killed him on the Clear Fork of the Brazos, and Kicking Wolf had kept 2 companies of rangers busy for 20 years, killed by a private. Carl had been shoeing a horse when P brought him that piece of news. He had felt so empty for a spell that he had to put off finishing the job. That had been 10 years ago, and Gus soon quit rangering. So far as Carl was concerned, the death of Kicking Wolf meant the end of the Comanches, and thus the end of their real job. There were other chiefs, true, and the final fights were yet to be fought, but he had never had the vengeful nature of some rangers and had no interest in spending a decade mopping up renegades and stragglers. Pedro Flores was a far cry from being the fighter Kicking Wolf had been. Pedro seldom rode out without 20 or 30 vaqueros to back him up, whereas Kicking Wolf, a small man no bigger than a boy, would raid San Antonio with 5 or 6 braves and manage to carry off 3 women and scare all the whites out of 7 or 8 counties just by traveling through them. But Pedro was of the same time and had occupied them just as long. I didn't know you liked that old bandit so much, Augustus said. I didn't like him, Carl said. I just didn't expect him to die. He probably never expected it either, Augustus said. He was a rough old Carl. After a few minutes, the empty feeling passed, but Carl didn't get to his feet. The sense that he needed to hurry, which had been with him most of his life, had disappeared for a space. We might as well go on to Montana, he said. Fun's
I'll be
over
right
around
back.
here.
And then we'll start.
Augustus snorted, amused by the way his friend's mind worked. Carl, there never was no fun around here, he said. And besides, you never had no fun in your life. You wasn't made for fun. That's my department. I used the wrong word, I guess, Carl said. Yes, but why did you? Augustus said. That's the interesting part. Carl didn't feel like getting drawn into an argument, so he kept quiet. First you run out of Indians, now you've run out of bandits. That's the point, Augustus said. You've got to have somebody to outwit, don't you? I don't know why I'd need anybody when I got you, Carl said. I don't see why we just don't take over northern Mexico now that Pedro's dead. It's just down the darn street, and I'm sure there's still a few folks down there who'd give you a fight. I don't need to fight, Carl said. Won't hurt us to make some money. It might, Augustus said. I might drown in the Republican River like that Pumphrey boy. Then you'd get all the money, and you wouldn't even know how to have fun with it. You'd probably use it to buy gravestones for old bandits that you happen to like. If you drown in the Republican River, I'll give you your part to Jake, Carl said. I guess he'd know how to spend it. With that, he mounted and rode off, meaning to find Jasper Fant and hire him if he really wanted to work.
Chapter 17.
By the time Jake Spoon had been in Lonesome Dub 10 days, Lorena knew she had a job to do. Namely, the job of holding him to his word and making sure he took her to San Francisco as he had promised to do. Of course, Jake had not given her any direct notice that he intended to do differently. He moved in with her immediately and was just as pleasant about everything as he had been the first day. He had not taken a cent of money from her, and they seldom passed an hour together without him complimenting her in some way, usually on her voice, or her looks, or the fine texture of her hair, or some delicacy of manner. He had a way of appearing always mildly surprised by her graces, and if anything, his sentiments only grew warmer as they got to know one another better. He repeated several times his dismay at her having been stuck for so long in a dismal hole like Lonesome Dub. But after a week, Lorena became aware of a curious thing. Jake was more attached to her than she was to him. The fact struck her late one afternoon while she was watching him nap. He had insisted on a root and gone right to sleep afterward. While the sweat was cooling on them, she realized she wasn't excited about him in the way she had been the first day. The first day had been one of the big days of her life because of the smooth way Jake had shown up and taken over, ending her long period of tension and discomfort. She still felt peaceful with him. They had never quarreled, and he had not demonstrated the slightest inclination to meanness. But it was clear to her already he was one of those men somebody had to take care of. He had fooled her for a few days into thinking that he would do the taking care of, but that wasn't so. He was a clever card player and could make money, but that was just part of it. Jake had to have company. When he slept, or when he was amused, or was just lolling around telling stories, the childish part of him showed, and it was a big part. Before the week was over, it seemed to her that he was all play. The realization didn't disturb her calm, though. It meant he needed her more than he would admit. She recognized the need and didn't care whether he admitted it or not. If Jake had been as firm as he pretended to be, it would have left her with little security. He could have just walked off. But he wouldn't. He liked talk, woman's talk, and the comforts of the bed. He even liked it that she lived above the saloon, since it meant a game was handy if he felt like playing. Since the Hat Creek outfit had been gathering cattle and getting ready for their drive, games were handier than they had been for a while. Several cowboys drifted into Lonesome Dub looking for work. Some of them had enough snap left at night to wander in and cut the cards. A tall cowboy named Needle Nelson showed up from north of San Antonio, and a cheerful cowboy from Brownsville named Bert Borum. At first, Xavier was cheered by all the new customers, until it occurred to him that they would only be there for a week or two. Then the thought of how empty the saloon would soon be filled him with gloom, and he stood by the door most of the night, his wash rag dripping down his leg. Lippy was kept plenty busy, for the cowboys were always requesting songs. Lippy liked the company. He was proud of his talent at the keyboard and would pound out any song that was requested. Jake took pains to teach Lorena a few things about card playing that she didn't know. She came to wonder how Jasper and Bert and Needle Nelson got by on so little sleep, for the captain worked them hard all day and the games went on half the night. The only cowboy likely to pull a sour face if she sat in was Dish Bogat, who wouldn't get over being in love with her. It amused her that he sat there looking so solemn, with this big mustache. Jake did not even seem to notice that the man was in love with her. She was tempted to tease Jake a little, but he had told her plain out he was a jealous man. For all she knew, he might shoot Dish, which would be a pity. Dish was nice enough. It was just that he couldn't compare with Jake Spoon. When the gathering and branding of the cattle had been going on for about 10 days, Lorena began to feel a crisis coming. She heard the cowboys speculate that the branding would be done in another week, which meant that they were close to starting the drive. The boys were saying that they were already late. "Hell, we'll be crossing the Yellowstone on the darn ice if we don't get started," Needle Nelson said. He was a funny-looking man, thin as a wire, with an Adam's apple that looked as big as a turkey egg. "Why, I doubt we'll make the Yellowstone," Jasper Fant said. "Most of us will get drought before we get that far." "Needle won't," Dish Bogat suggested. "There ain't a river up that way deep enough he couldn't walk through it and not get his hat wet." "I can swim anyway," Needle remarked. "I'd like to see you swim with 50 or 60 cattle on top of you, but maybe your own horse," Jasper said. "Ain't no 50 or 60 cattle gonna be on top of me," Needle replied, unruffled. "No darn horse, neither." Bert Borum thought Needle was hilarious. He thought pretty near everything was hilarious. He was one of those men who have a laugh you like to hear. "I'm getting me a float before I cross any river," he declared. "What kind of float?" Dish inquired. "Ain't decided," Bert said. "Might tie a few jugs to my horse. Jugs are good floats." "Where would you get a darn jug on a cattle drive?" Jasper asked. "If the captain was to catch you with the jug, he'd want to know who drank the whiskey out of it." Jake was tolerant of the cowboys, but careful to keep himself a bit apart from them. He never chimed in when they talked about the life they would have on the trail. He never spoke to Lorena about the fact that the herd would be leaving in 10 days. He didn't work much on the branding either, though once in a while he spent a night helping them gather more stock. Mostly he let it appear that the drive had nothing to do with him. Lorena didn't press him, but she kept an eye on him. If he wanted to stay, that was one thing. But if he planned on going, he was going to have to figure a way to take her. He wasn't leaving without her, whatever he might think about the matter. Then before the issue came to a head, something happened that took Lorena completely unaware. It was a blistering day, and the saloon totally empty except for Lippy. Xavier, who had a taste for fish, had gone off to the river to see if he could catch any. Lorena was sitting at a table practicing one or two card tricks Jake had taught her, when who should walk in? Gus. His shirt was wet from sweat, as if he'd been underwater a week, and even his hat band was sweated through. He went around behind the bar and got himself a bottle and brought it over to the table, grinning a big grin despite the heat. She noticed that he had brought her a glass, which struck her as bold, but then Gus would do anything, as Jake was always saying. "What I can't figure out is why there ain't but 2 sinners in this saloon," Gus said. Lorena made no comment. Lippy piped up. "I've tried to sin all my life. Ain't you gonna count me?" he asked. "No, you got a hole in your stomach," Augusta said. You paid for yours, but so far me and Lori have got off scot-free. Gus poured a little whiskey in her glass and filled his just below the brim. I want a poke, he said, as casual as if he were asking her to loan him 2 bits. Lorena was so taken aback that she didn't know what to say. She looked at Lippy, who was just sitting there listening as if it were his right. Gus, of course, was not the slightest bit embarrassed by what he was suggesting. He took his hat off and hung it on the chair, looking at her pleasantly. Lorena felt sorely at a loss. She had never expected Gus to commit such a blunder, for it was well known that he and Jake were good friends. Gus must know that Jake was living with him, and yet he walked in and asked, as if it made no difference. She sat silent, showing her puzzlement, which only seemed to amuse Gus. I wished you wouldn't sit there thinking about it, he said. Just sell me a poke and be done with it. I hate to sit and watch a woman think. Why? She asked, finding her voice again. She felt the beginnings of indignation. I guess I got the right to think if I want to, she added. Gus just grinned. Oh, you got the right, he said. It's just that it's fearsome for a man to have a woman start thinking right in front of him. It always leads to trouble. He paused and drank a healthy swallow of whiskey. I'm with Jake now, Lorena said, merely stating the obvious. Well, I know that, honey, Augustus said. The minute I looked up the road and seen Jake coming, I knew you and him had settled in. Jake's a good hand to settle in with, I admit. A sight better than me. But the fact is, he went out to the cow camp at the wrong time, and Carl put him to work. Carl don't appreciate Jake's restful qualities like you and me do. He's been fretting for a week because Jake wasn't working. Now that he's got him, you can bet he'll keep him a day or two. Lorena looked at Lippy, wishing he wasn't there. Lippy sat, astonished at what he was hearing. His lip hung down like a flap of some kind. It always did when he forgot himself. Jake ain't got the stuff to stand up to Carl, Augustus said. He's gonna have to stay out there and brand doggies for a while. So there ain't no reason for you not to sell me a poke. I told you the reason, Lorena. Jake takes care of me now, she added. No, he don't, Gus said. You take care of him. It was the very truth that Lorena had discovered for herself, and it stumped her that Gus would not only know it, but come right out with it as if it were an ordinary fact. Jake Spoon has never taken care of nobody, Gus said. Not even himself. He's the world's child. The main point about him is that he'll always find somebody to take care of him. It used to be me and Carl, but right now it's you. That's fine and good, but it's no reason you should go out of business entirely. You can sell me a poke and still take care of Jake. Lorena knew that was true as far as it went. Jake was not hard to take care of, probably not hard to fool. It wouldn't enter his head that she would sell a poke now that she had him. He had plenty of pride and not a little vanity. It was one of those things she liked about him. Jake thought well of his looks. He was not a dressing man like Tinkersville, but he nonetheless took pains with his appearance and knew that women fancied him. She had never seen him mad, but she knew he would not like anyone to make light of him. I believe he'd shoot the man that touches me, she said. Well, I believe it too, Lippy said. Jake's mighty partial to Lord. Hell, you're partial to her yourself. We're all partial to her. But Jake ain't exactly. He killed a man in Arkansas, Lorena said. Shrugged. He fired off a buffalo gun and the bullet happened to hit a dentist, he said. I don't call that no crime of passion. Lorena didn't like it that Gus acted like Jake wasn't much. He had a reputation for being a cool man to fight. Well, he killed a bandit, Lippy said. Hit him right in the Adam's apple, I heard. Truth of that is, the bandit rode into the bullet, Augustus said. He was unlucky, like the dentist. Lorena just sat. The situation was so unexpected that she could not think about it clearly. Of course, she had no intention of going upstairs with Gus, but he couldn't just be he scared off with a look like some cowboy. Gus was not afraid of looks, or of Jake either, it seemed. "I'll give you $50, Gus said with a big grin. Lippy nearly fell off a stool. He had never seen or imagined anything so rash. $50 for one poke. Then it occurred to him that he would cheerfully give as much, if he had it, to get under Lorena's skirts. A man could always get more money, but there wasn't one Lord. Not on the border, anyway. "Hell, I would too," he said, just to register the offer. "I didn't know you was so rich," Augustus said, a little amused. "Well, I ain't now, but I might be," Lippy said. "Business is picking up." "Pshaw," Augustus said. "Once we start to drive, you'll be lucky to earn a nickel in a month." Lorena decided her best out was to pretend to be frightened of Jake's vengeance, though now that she had thought about it, she knew Gus was probably right. She had met one or two men who were proven killers, and Jake didn't have their manner at all. "I won't do it," she said. "He'll kill us if he finds out." "How would he find out?" Gus asked. "Lippy might tell him," she said. Augustus looked at Lippy. It was true that the man was a dreadful gossip, moreover, who had scant materials to work with. It would not be easy for him to resist mentioning that he had heard a man offer $50 for a poke. "I'll give you $10 to keep your mouth shut," Augustus said. "And if you betray me, I'll shoot another hole in your stomach." "Give me the 10, Lippy said, his astonishment growing. That made $60 Gus would be spending. He had never heard of anyone spending such an amount on their pleasure. But then, so far as he knew, there was no one anywhere like Gus, a man who seemed to care nothing for money. Gus handed over the money in Lippy's pocket, knowing that he had struck a bargain he'd better keep at least until Gus died. Gus was no one to fool with. He had seen several men try, usually over card games, and most all of them got whacked over the head with Gus's big gun. Gus didn't shoot unless he had to, but he was not loath to whack a man. Lorena felt her indignation growing. She was beginning to feel cornered, something she had not expected to have to feel again. Jake was supposed to have ended that, and yet he hadn't. Of course, he probably never suspected his own friend would make such a move behind his back, and yet it still seemed negligent of him, for he knew Gus's ways. "You can pay him if you want, but I ain't going," she said. "Jake's my sweetheart." "I ain't trying to cut him out," Augustus said. "I just want a poke." Lorena felt her silence coming back. It was the only way to deal with such a situation. She sat for a few minutes, not talking, hoping he would go away. But it didn't work. He just sat and drank, perfectly friendly and in no hurry. Once she thought about it, the sun grew on her a little bit. It was something to be offered $50. She would have thought it crazy in anyone except Gus, but Gus was clearly not crazy. In a way, it was a big compliment that he would offer her $50 just for that. "Go get a Mexican woman," she said. "Why waste your money?" "Because you're my preference," Augustus said. "I'll tell you what, let's cut the cards. If you're high, I'll give you the money and forget the poke. If I'm high, I'll give you the money and you give me the poke." Lorena thought she might as well. After all, it was just gambling, which was what Jake did. If she won, it would all seem like a joke, something that Gus had cooked up to pass the time. Besides, she would have $50 and could send to San Antonio for some new dresses, so Jake wouldn't be so critical of her wardrobe. She could tell him that she beat Gus to the tune of $50, which would astonish him, since he played with Gus all the time and seldom won more than a few dollars. Then, in a second, Gus beat her. She came up with 10 spades, him with
and I'm on
it was her
Torment
spades
3.
he cheated, though she couldn't have said how. She had not realized before what a determined man he was. He had come in for a purpose, and she had not been clever enough to head him off. He paid her the $50 at once. It had not been a bluff. When he had had the poke and was dressing, she found that she felt pretty cheerful and was not in the mood to hurry him out. After all, Gus had paid her many visits and given her nothing to hold against it. The $50 was flattering, and she rather liked it that she was his preference, even though he was Jake's best friend. She had stopped feeling silent and was content to let him loll for a few minutes. "Well, do you and Jake aim to marry?" he asked, looking at her cheerfully. "He ain't mentioned it," she said. "He's taking me to San Francisco," Augustus snorted. "I figured that was his game," he said. "He promised," Laura said. "I mean to hold him to it, Gus." "You'll need my help then," Augustus said. "Jake is a slippery eel, and the only way to keep him around is to chain him to a wagon." "I can keep him around," Lorraine said confidently. "Oh, he fancies you, but that don't mean he'll stay around. My guess is he'll use the drive as an excuse when the time comes." "If he goes with it, then I'm going too," she said. "Why, Laura, you're welcome as far as I'm concerned. The problem is Carl. See, he ain't very tolerant of women." That was no news. Captain Carl was one of the few men in the region who had never been to visit her. In fact, so far as she could remember, he had never been in the saloon. "It's a free country, ain't it?" she said. "I guess I can go where I want." Gus got off the bed and tucked his carrot back in his pants. "It's not very free if you happen to work for Carl," he said. "You think Lippy will tell her?" she asked. To her surprise, she felt no guilt at all about operating behind Jake's back. So far as she was concerned, she was still a sweetheart. It had happened only because Gus had been too quick for her in a card game. It didn't affect the situation one way or another. "He won't tell," Augustus said. "Lippy's got more sense than you might think. What he figures is that if he keeps quiet, he might make another $10 sometime, which is right. He might. Well, not unless we play a hand," Lorena said. "I don't trust your cut." Augustus grinned. "A man who wouldn't cheat for a poke don't want one bad enough," he said as he took his hat.
Chapter 18.
Augustus rode back to camp a little after sunset, thinking the work would have stopped by then. The cattle were being held in a long valley near the river, some 5 miles from town. Every night, Carl went across the river with 5 or 6 hands and came back with 200 or 300 Mexican cattle. Longhorns mostly, skinny as rail and wild as deer. Whatever they got, they branded the next day as part of the crew that had rested during the hard end of the work. Only Carl worked both shifts. If he slept, it was an hour or two before breakfast or after supper. The rest of the time he worked, and so far as anyone could tell, the pace agreed with him. He had taken to riding the hell bitch 2 days out of 3. The mare seemed no more affected by the work than he was. Bolivar had not taken kindly to being moved to a straggly camp out in the brush, with no dinner bell to whack or crowbar to whack it with. He kept his 10-gauge near the chuck box and scowled at everybody. The Irishmen were so intimidating that they were always the last ones in line. As a consequence, they got little to eat and were no longer as fat as they had been the day they arrived. It seemed the Irishmen were a part of the outfit, though. Their total inexperience was offset by an energy and a will to learn that impressed even Carl. He let him stay in the first place because he was so short-handed he couldn't afford to turn away any willing hand. By the time more competent men arrived, the Irishmen had gotten over their fear of horses and worked with a will. Not being cowboys, they had no prejudice against working on the ground. Once shown the proper way to throw a roped animal, they cheerfully flung themselves on whatever the ropers drug up to the branding fire, even if it was a 2-year-old bull with lots of horn and a mean disposition. They had no great finesse, but they were dogged and would eventually get the creature down. This willingness to work on the ground was indispensable, for most cowboys would rather eat poison than be forced to dismount. They all fancied themselves ropers and swelled like toads if asked to do work they considered beneath their dignity. Since there were few goats to steal near camp, Bowles' menus relied heavily on beef, with the usual admixture of beans. He had brought along a sack of chilies, and he dumped them liberally into his beans, feeling free to augment the dish with pieces of whatever varmint strayed into his path. Rattlesnakes mostly, with an occasional armadillo. For several days, the crew ate the fiery beans without complaint, only the Irishman showing pronounced ill effects. Young Sean had difficulty with the peppers. He could not eat the beans without weeping, but with all the work, his appetite raged to such a point that he could not avoid the beans. He ate them and wept. Most of the crew liked the boy, and had decided to treat his frequent weepings as a simple, mild aberration, related in some way to his nationality. Then one day, Jasper Fant caught Bolivar skinning a rattlesnake. He assumed Bolivar was merely going to make himself a rattlesnake belt, but he happened to turn around as Bowles sliced the snake right into the stew pot, a sight which agitated him greatly. He had heard that people ate snake, but had never expected to do so himself. When he told the other hands what he had seen, they were so aroused that they wanted to hang Bolivar on the spot, or at least rope him and drag him through the prickly pear to improve his manners. But when they approached Augustus with the information about the snake, he laughed at them. "You boys must have been raised on satin pillows," he said. "If you'd rangered, you'd have got a taste for snake long ago." He then proceeded to give them a lecture on the culinary properties of rattlesnake, a lecture that Jasper, for one, received rather stiffly. It might be superior to chicken, rabbit, possum, as Gus claimed, but that didn't mean he wanted to eat it. His visits to the stew pot became a source of irritation to everyone. He would fish around in the pot for several minutes, seeking portions of meat that he could feel confident that had come from the snake. Such delicacy exasperated the rest of the crew, who were usually so hungry by supper time that they could ill abide waits. Call and Jake rode in while Augustus was eating. The sight of Gus with his plate full put Jake in a low temper, since he himself had handled branding irons all day while Gus had amused himself in town and stayed fresh. They had branded over 400 cattle since Sunday, enough to make Jake wish that he had never brought up the notion of taking cattle in Montana. "Hello, girls," Augustus said. "You look like you've done a heavy laundry. Wait till I finish my beef and I'll help you off your horses." "I don't want off mine," Jake said. "Hand me a plate and I'll eat on the way to town." Call felt irritated. It was the first full day Jake had put in since the work started, and mostly he had lazed through it. "Why must you go?" he asked, trying to keep him on. "We're going to make our last drag tonight. We'll have to get started in." Jake dismounted and walked over to the road, pretending he hadn't heard. He didn't want an argument with Call if he could avoid it. In truth, he had not been thinking very far ahead since drifting back to Lonesome. He had often thought that a fortune could be made in cattle in Montana. But then a man could think of a fortune without actually having to go and make it. The only good thing to be said for trailing cattle that far north was that it beat hanging in Arkansas, or rotting in some jail. Then there was Lori. So far, she hadn't had a single fit, but that didn't mean she wouldn't if she found out he was leaving. On the other hand, he couldn't very well take it. No one in his memory had ever tried to bring a woman into one of Call's camps. It was all vexing, having decisions to make, yet having no time to think them through. He got himself a hunk of beef, some of the old Mexican's peppery stew, and went back to where Call and Gus were sitting. He felt distinctly irritated with Call. The man never seemed to need any of the things other humans need, like sleep, women. Life for Call was work, and he seemed to think everyone else would see it the same way. "Why, Jake, you look plumb grumpy," Gus said. Jake sat down and began to eat. "Honest work don't agree with you, I guess." "No, I'm about as cooked as this beef," Jake said. Newt and the two Irishmen were holding the herd. The Irishmen were particularly good night herders because they could sing. Their melodies seemed to soothe the cattle, In fact, the whole camp enjoyed the Irish scene. Newt couldn't sing a lick, but he rapidly developed into such a skilled cowhanger that Call felt a little guilty for having held him back for so long. I'm sure partial to the evening, Augustus. Evening and the morning. If we just didn't have to have the rest of the darn day, I'd be a lot happier. If we have a good drag tonight, we'll start north on Monday, Call said. How's that suit you, Jake? Oh, fine, Jake said. But you boys don't have to try and suit me with your drive. I've been thinking of spending some time in San Antonio. That's a big disappointment, Augustus said. It's a long way to Montana, and I was counting on you to keep up the conversation. Well, count again, Jake said, deciding on the spot that he wouldn't go. Call knew there was no point in reminding Jake that the whole drive had been his idea. The man was willful as a child in some respects. Show him what he ought to do, and he would dig in his heels and refuse. It was particularly irritating in this instance, because nobody in the outfit had ever been further north than Kansas. Jake knew the country could be a big help. Jake, we wish you'd come, he said. We were relying on you to help us choose the route. No, Jake don't like to help his compañeros, Augustus said. He's got his own fancies to cultivate. The fact that he caused all this don't mean a thing to him. Did I cause it, Jake, trying to keep the talk light? Of course you caused it, Augustus said. Who was it said Montana's the cowman's paradise? Well, it is, Jake said. Then you should have picked a cattleman to mention it to. Not two old laws like us. Well, you're cattleman now, Jake said. All it takes is cows. Are you aiming to marry Lori? Augustus said. Jane was telling. Marry? Jake was astonished. Why would I marry her? Well, you could do worse, Augustus said. An old scamp like you's apt to break down any time. It would be nice to have a young woman to rub your back and bring you soup. I ain't near as old as you, Jake. Why don't you marry? It was talking in the here. Swift Bill Spettle led a horse kicking that morning, had a knot on his forehead as big as a goose egg. You best let Bowl rub some ointment on that bum, Call suggested. The Spettle boys were mighty green and were not afraid to work. Call got up and went to get his supper. As soon as he left, Augustus stretched his legs and grinned at Jake. I played a hand with Lori this afternoon. I believe you've made her restless, Jake. How's that? She does seem to be looking forward to San Francisco, Augustus said. Jake felt himself getting more and more peeved. Lorena should have known better than to play cards with Gus, or even talk to him, though she could hardly be blamed for listening. It was well known that Gus would talk to his stuff if he couldn't find a hero. I doubt she'll want to spend no time in San Antonio, Augustus said. That's where she was before she came here, and women don't like to go backwards. Most women will never back up an inch in their whole lives. I can't see that it's in your affair what we did, Jake said. I guess she'd go to San Antonio if I said to. If she don't, she'll just get left. Bring her on the drive, Augustus said. She might like Montana, and if she gets tired of looking at the ass end of these cows, you could always stop in Denver. It was something, a talent Gus had for saying the very thing that a man might have been half thinking. Jake had more than once considered Denver, regretted more than once he hadn't stopped there instead of going to Fort Smith. Going along with a drive would be a good enough way to get back to Denver. Of course, that didn't settle the question of Lord exactly. You know as well as I do, Call would never allow no woman in his campus. It was surprising that Gus would even suggest such a thing. Call ain't God. He don't have to get his way every day of the month. If she was my sweetheart, I'd bring her. And if he didn't like it, he could just bite himself. You couldn't afford it, Gus. No better card player than you, Jake said, standing up. I believe I'll go to town. I feel like roaming around Mexico. Without another word, he got on his horse and left. Carl watched him go and walked back over to Gus. You think he'll come with us on the drive? He asked. Not unless you let him bring his girl, Augusta said. Why, is Jake that crazy? Carl asked. Does he want to bring that girl? It never occurred to him, but it has now, Augusta said. I invited her. Carl was impatient to get off, but Gus's remark stopped him. Gus was never one to do the usual, but this was stretching things, even for him. You done what? Told him he ought to bring Laura along, Augusta said. She'd improve the company. I won't have it, Carl said at once. God damn you, you know better than that. Ain't you late for work? Augusta said. I can't enjoy the night for all this jabbering. Carl decided it was some joke. Even Gus wouldn't go that far. I'm going, he said. You watch this end. Augustus lay back, his head against the sun. It was a clear night, the stars just beginning to appear. Needle, Bert, Pea, Eats, Dish were waiting to go to Mexico. The rest of the boys were holding the herd. Bull was peeing on the campfire, causing it to sputter. Carl turned his horse and rode toward the river.
Chapter 19.
Newt's mind had begun to dwell on the north for long stretches, particularly at night when he had had nothing to do but ride slowly around and around the herd, listening to the small noises the bedded cattle made, or the sad singing of the Irish. He thought of the north, trying to imagine what it must be like. He had grown up with the sun shining, mesquite, chaparral, armadillos, coyotes, Mexicans, shallow Rio Grande. Only once had he been to a city, San Antonio. Dietz had taken him on one of his banking trips, and Newt had been in a daze from all there was to see. Once, too, he had gone with Dietz and Pete to deliver a small bunch of horses to Matagorda Bay, and had seen the great gray ocean. Then, too, he felt dazed, staring at the world of water. But even the sight of the ocean had not stirred him so much as the thought of the north. All his life he had heard talk of the plains that had no end, and of the Indians and buffalo and all the creatures that lived on them. Mr. Gus had even talked of great bears so thick that bullets couldn't kill, and deer-like creatures called elk twice the size of ordinary deer. Now, in only a few days, he would be going north. A prospect so exciting that for hours at a stretch he was taken away from himself and imagining. He continued to do his normal work, although his mind wasn't really on it. He could imagine himself a mouse out in a sea of grass chasing buffalo. He could scare himself to the point where his breath came short just imagining the great thick bears. Before the Irishman had been there a week, he had made friends with Sean O'Brien. At first the conversation was one-sided, for Sean was full of worries and probably talking to Bluester once he found that Newt would listen and not make fun of him. The talk gushed out. Most of it homesick talk. He missed his dead mother and said over and over again he would not have left Ireland if she hadn't died. He would cry immediately at the thought of his mother. And when Newt revealed that his mother was also dead, the friendship became closer. Did you have a pa? Newt asked one day as they were resting by the river after a stretch of tramping. Yeah, I had one, the bastard, Sean said grimly. He only came home when he was a mind to beat us. Why would he beat you? Newt asked. He liked to, Sean said. He was a bastard, Pa. He beat Ma and all of us whenever he could catch us. We laid for him once, was gonna brain him with a shovel. He was a lucky one. The night was dark and we never seen him. Well, what happened to him? Ha! A drunkard, John said. He fell down a well and drowned. Saved us killing him and going to jail, I guess. Newt had always missed having a father, but the fact that Sean spoke so coldly of his put the matter in a different light. Perhaps he was not so unlucky after all. He was riding around the herd when Jake Spoon trotted past on his way to Lonesome Dove. "Going to town, Jake?" Newt asked. "Yes, I think I will," Jake said. He didn't stop to pass the time. In a second, he was out of sight in shadows. It made Newt's spirits fall a little, for Jake had seldom said 2 words to him since he came back. Newt had to admit that Jake was not much interested in him, or the rest of them either. He gave the impression of not exactly liking anything around the Hat Creek outfit. Listening to the talk around the campfire at night, Newt learned that cowboys were unanimously hostile to Jake for fixing it so Lorena was no longer a whore. Dish, he knew, was particularly riled, though Dish never said much when the other boys were talking about it. "Hell," Needle said. "There never was but one thing worth doing on this border. Now a man can't even do that." "A man can do it plenty over in Mexico," Bert observed. "Cheaper, too." "That's what I like about you, Bert," Augustus said, as he whittled a mesquite twig to him. "You're a practical man." "No, he just likes them brown whores," Needle said. Needle kept a solemn look on his face at all times, seldom varying his expression. "Guess I've heard it said that you had a fancy for that woman yourself," Jasper said. "I wouldn't have suspected it in a man as old as you." "What would you know about anything, Jasper?" Augustus said. "Age don't slow a man's whoring. It's a lack of income that does that. No more prosperous than you look, I wouldn't think you'd know much about it." "We oughtn't to talk this way around these young boys," Bert said. "I doubt one of them's even had a poke unless it was milk." A general laugh went up. "These young'uns will have to wait until we get to Ogallala," Augustus said. "I've heard it's the Sodom of the Plains." "If it's worse than Fort Worth, I can't wait to get there," Jasper said. "I've heard there's whores you can marry for a week if you stay in town that long." "It won't matter how long we stay," Augustus said. "I'll have skinned all you boys of several years' wages before we get that far. I'd skin you out of a month or 2 tonight if somebody'd break out the cards." That was all it took to get a game started. Apart from telling stories and speculating about whores, it seemed to Newt the cowboys would rather play cards than anything. Every night, if there was many as 4 who weren't working, they'd spread a saddle blanket near the campfire and play for hours, mostly using their future wages as money. Already the debts which existed were so complicated that it gave Newt a headache to think about them. Jasper Fant had lost his saddle to Dish Bogat, only Dish was letting him keep it and use it. "A man dumb enough to bet his saddle is dumb enough to eat gorge," Mr. Gus said when he heard about that bet. "I have at okra, Jasper, but I have never yet no gourd." So far, neither Newt nor the Rainier or Spettle boys had been allowed to play. The men felt it would be little short of criminal to bankrupt young men at the outset of their careers. But sometimes, when nobody was using the deck, Newt borrowed it and he and the others played among themselves. Sean O'Brien joined in. They usually played for pebbles, since none of them had money. Talking to Sean had made Newt curious about Ireland. Sean said the grass was thick as a carpet. The description didn't help much, for Newt had never seen a carpet. The Hat Creek outfit possessed no roads of any kind, or anything that was green. Newt had a hard time imagining how a whole country would be covered with green grass. "What do you do in Ireland?" he asked. "Mostly dig spuds," Sean said. "But aren't there horses and cows?" Newt asked. Sean thought for a moment. He could only remember about a dozen cows in the vicinity of his village, which was near the sea. He had slept beside their own milk cow on many a cold night, but he figured if he tried to lie down beside one of the animals they called cows in America, the cow would be 50 miles away before he got to sleep. "There are cows," he said, "but you don't find them in bunches." There'd be no place to put them. What do you do with all the grass then? He asked. Why, nothing, Sean said. It just grows. The next morning, while helping Dietz and P build the branding fires, Newt mentioned that Sean said he brought his milk cow into the house and slept with her. Dietz had a good laugh at the thought of the cow in the house. P stopped work for about 10 minutes while he thought the matter over. He never liked to give his opinion too quickly. Well, it wouldn't work around the cabin, he said finally, that being his opinion. How long do you think it'll take us to get up north? Newt asked Dietz, the acknowledged expert on times and distances. Though he had laughed about the cow in the house, Dietz had not been his usual cheerful self the last few days. He felt a change coming. They were leaving Lonesome Dove, a life quiet and steady, and Dietz could not understand the reason for it. The captain was not prone to rash moves, and yet it seemed rash to Dietz to just pick up and go north. Usually when he thought about the captain's decisions, he agreed with him. This time he couldn't. He was going, but he felt uneasy in his mind. He remembered one thing the captain had drilled into them many times during the rangering years, that a good start made for a good campaign. Now it seemed to him that the captain had forgotten his own rule. Jake Spoon came home one day, and the next day the captain was ready to go, with a crew that was just a patched-together bunch, a lot of wild cattle, and horses, most of which were only half broke. Besides that, it was nearly April, late to be starting out to go so far. He had been on the plains in summer and seen how quickly the water holes dried up. Dietz felt a foreboding, a sense that they were starting out on a hard journey to a far place. And now there was the boy, too excited about the prospect to keep his mind on the work. Chop them sticks, Dietz said. Don't be worrying about the time. It'll be fall. I expect before we get there. Dietz watched the boy, hoping he wouldn't chop his foot off cutting the wood. He knew how to handle an axe, but he was forgetful once he got his mind on something. He didn't stop working, he just worked absently, thinking about something else. They were friends, though, he and Newt. The boy was young and had all his hopes, while Dietz was older and had fewer. Newt sometimes asked so many questions that Dietz had to laugh. He was like a cistern from which questions flowed instead of water. Some Dietz answered, and some he didn't. He didn't tell him that even when life seemed easy, it kept on getting harder. Dietz liked his work, liked being part of the outfit and having his name on the sign, yet he often felt sad. His main happiness consisted of sitting with his back against the water tank at night, watching the sky and the changing moon. He had known several men who blew their heads off, and he had pondered it much. It seemed to him it was probably because they could not take enough happiness just from the sky and the moon to carry them over the low feelings that came to all men. Those feelings hadn't come to the boy yet. He was a good boy, as gentle as the gray doves that came to peck the gravel in the flats behind the barn. He would try to do any task that was asked of him, and if he worried over much, it was that he wasn't good enough at his work to please the captain. But then the whole outfit worried about that, all at least except for Mr. Gus. Dietz himself had fallen short a few times over the years, and felt the captain's displeasure afflict him like a bruise. "I swam," Pete said. "Jake slipped off again. He sure don't take to branding." "Mr. Jake, he don't take to work," Dietz said with a chuckle. "It don't have to be branded." Newt went on chopping wood, a little bothered by the fact that Jake had such a bad reputation with men. They all considered him to be a man who shirked his duties. Mr. Gus worked even less, and nobody seemed to feel that way about him. It was puzzling, and to Newt's mind, unfair. Jake had just returned. Once he got rested, perhaps he would be more interested in work. While he was puzzling about it, he took a bad swing with the axe, and a piece of mesquite he was trying to split flew right up and almost hit Dietz in the head. It would have, except that Dietz had evidently been expecting just such an accident. He quickly ducked. Newt was embarrassed. At the moment he had made him slip, his mind had drifted to Lorena. He was wondering what spending a day with her would actually be like. Would they just sit in the saloon playing cards or what? Since he had not spoken to her, it was hard for him to know what the two of them could do for a whole day, but he liked to think about it. Dietz didn't say a word or even look at Newt accusingly, but Newt was still mortified. There were times when Dietz seemed almost to be able to read his mind. What would he think if he knew that he had been thinking about Lorena? After that, he reminded himself that Lorena was Jake's woman and tried to pay better attention to splitting the tough wood.
Chapter 20.
The minute Jake stepped in the door of the dry bean, Lorena saw that he was in a sulk. He went right over to the bar and got a bottle and 2 glasses. He was sitting at a table piddling with a deck of cards. It was early in the evening and no one was around. Usually 3 or 4 of the Hat Creek Cowboys would be there by that time. Lorena watched Jake closely for a few minutes to see if she was the cause of his sulk. After all, she had sold Gus the Poke that very afternoon. It was not impossible that Jake had found out some way. She was not one who expected to get away with much in life. If you did a thing hoping a certain person wouldn't find out, that person always did. When Gus tricked her and she gave him the poke, she was confident that the matter would get back to Jake eventually. Lippy was only human, and things that happened to her got told and repeated. She didn't exactly want Jake to know, but she wasn't afraid of him either. He might hit her, or he might shoot Gus. She found she couldn't easily predict him, which was one of the reasons she didn't care if he found out. After that, she would know him a lot better, whatever he did. But when he sat down at the table and set a glass in front of her, she soon realized it was not her who put the tight look in his face. She saw nothing unfriendly in his eyes. She took a sip or 2 of whiskey. About that time, Lippy came over and sat down at the table with him as if he'd been invited. "Well, you've come in by yourself, I see," Lippy said, pushing his dirty bowler back off his wrinkled forehead. "I did. By God, I intend to be by myself," Jake said irritably. He got up and without another word took his bottle and glass and headed for the stairs. He had put her out of sorts with Lippy, for it was still hot in her room, and she would rather have stayed in the saloon where there was at least a breath of breeze. But with Jake so out of sorts, there was nothing to do but go upstairs. She gave Lippy a cool look as she got up, which surprised him so it made his lip drop. "Why are you looking at me that way?" he asked. "I never told on you." Lorena didn't answer. A look was better than words where Lippy was concerned. Then the very minute she got in the room, Jake decided he wanted a poke, and in a hurry. He had drunk a half a glass of whiskey while he was climbing the stairs, and a big shot of whiskey nearly always made him want it. He was dusty as could be from a day with the cattle, and would usually have waited for a bath, or at least washed the grit off his face and hands in the wash basin. But this time he didn't wait. He even tried to kiss her with his hat on, which didn't work at all. His hat was as dusty as the rest of him. The dust got in her nose and made her sneeze. His haste was unusual. He was a picky man, apt to complain if the sheets weren't clean enough to suit him. This time he didn't seem to notice that the dust was sifting out of his clothes onto the floor. When he opened his pants, pulled his shirt tail out, a trickle of sand came with it. The night was stifling, and Jake so sandy that by the time he got through, there was so much dirt in the bed that they might as well have been wallowing around on the ground. There were little lines of mud on her belly where the sweat had caked the dust. She didn't resent it particularly. It was better than smoke pots and mosquitoes. It was only when Jake sat up to reach for his whiskey bottle that he noticed the dust. "Darn, I'm sandy," he said. "I should have bathed in the river." He sighed and poured himself a whiskey and sat with his back against the wall, idly running a hand up and down her leg. Lorena waited, taking a sip or 2 of whiskey. Jake looked tired. "Well, these boys," he said. "They are aggravating devils." "Which boys?" she asked. Call and Gus, he said. Just because I mentioned Montana to them, they expect me to help them drive them darn cattle up there. Lorena watched him. He looked out the window and wouldn't meet her eye. I'll be damned if I'll do it, he said. I ain't no cow puncher. Call just got it in his head to go for some reason. Well, let him go. But she knew that bucking Gus and the captain was no easy thing for Jake. He looked at her finally, sadness in his eyes, as if he was asking her to think of a way to help him. Then he grinned. His little, smart, lazy grin. Gus thinks we ought to marry, he said. I'd rather go to San Francisco, Maria said. Jake stroked her leg again. Well, we will, he said. But don't Gus come up with some notion. He thinks I ought to bring you on a drive. Then he looked at her again as if trying to fathom what was in her thoughts. Lorena let him look. Tired as he was, with his shirt open, there seemed nothing in the man to fear. It was hard to know what he himself feared. He was proud as a turkey cock around other men, irritable and quick to pass an insult. Sitting on her bed, his clothes unbuttoned, he seemed anything but tough. What was old Gus up to this afternoon, he asked. He never got back until sundown. The same thing you was just up to, Lorena said. Jake lifted his eyebrows, not really surprised. I noted. That scamp, he said, left me to work so he could come and pester you. Lorena decided to tell it. That would be better than if he found out from somebody else. Besides, though she considered herself his sweetheart, she didn't consider him her master. He had not really mastered anything except poking, though he had improved her card game a little. Gus offered me $50, she said. Jake lifted his eyebrows again in his tired way, as if there was nothing he could possibly be told that would really surprise him. It angered her a little, his acting as if he knew everything in advance. He's a fool with his money, Jake said. I turned him down, Lorena said. I told him I was with you. Jake's eyes came alive for a moment, and he gave her a smart slap on the cheek. So quick, she scarcely saw it coming. Though it stung her cheek, there was no real anger in it. It was nothing to some of the licks she had taken.
Cheers, everyone.
Jake hit her once, as if that
Northern
was
Lights.
a rule in the game they were playing, and then the life went out of his eyes again, and he looked at her with only tired curiosity. I reckon he got his poke, he said. If he didn't, you can hit me a little. We cut the cards for it, and he cheated, Lorena said. I can't prove it, but I know it. He gave me the $50 anyway. I ought to told you never to cut the cards with that old cud, Jake said. Not unless you're ready for what he's ready for. He's the best card cheat I ever met. He don't cheat often, but when he does, you ain't gonna catch him. He wiped some of the mud off her belly. Now that you're rich, you can loan me 20, he said. Why should I? Lorena said. You didn't earn it. You didn't stop it. Besides, he had money from his own card playing. If she knew anything, it was not to give a man money. That was nothing more than an invitation to get sold with their help. Jake looked amused. Keep it then. But if it had been any other man than Gus, I would have shot you. If you'd known, she said, getting up. Jake stood looking out the window while she stripped the bed. He sipped his whiskey, but didn't mention the trail again. Are you going with the herd, she asked. Ain't decided, he said. They'll be here till Monday. I plan to leave when you leave, she said. With the herd or not? Jake looked around. She was standing in her shift, a little red spot on one cheek where he had slapped her. A lick that made no impression on her at all. It seemed to him there was never much time with women. Before you could look at one twice, you were into an argument, and they were telling you what was going to happen. You'd look a sight in a cow camp, he said. All them darn cowboys are in love with you anyway. I'd have to kill half of them before we got to the Red River if you go along. They won't bother me, she said. Gus is the only one with the guts to try it. Jake chuckled. Yes, he'd want to cut the cards twice a day, he said. It seemed to him harder as he got older to find a simple way of life. On the one hand, there were his friends who expected something of him. On the other, there was Lori, who expected something else. He himself had no fixed ideas about what to do, though he thought it would be pleasant to live in a warm town where he could find a card game. Having a pretty woman to stay with made life happier, of course, but not if it meant having to take the woman to San Francisco. Of course he could run. He wasn't chained to the bedpost or to the friends either. There was Mexico right out the window. But what would that get him? Mexico was even more violent than Texas. Mexicans were always hanging Texans to make up for all the Mexicans Texans hung. If hanging was all he had to look forward to, he'd rather take his in Arkansas. Lori was watching him with a strange heat in her eyes. It wasn't because he had slapped her either. He felt she was reading his mind. Somehow most women could read his mind. He had only really outmaneuvered one, a little red-headed whore in Cheyenne who was all heart and no brain. Lorena wasn't going to be fooled. Her look put him on the defensive. Most men would have beat her black and blue for what she had done that afternoon, and yet she hadn't even made an attempt to conceal it. She played by her own rules. It struck him that she might be the one to kill the sheriff from Arkansas if it came to that. She wouldn't balk at it if he could keep her wanting it. You don't need to stand there looking out of sorts, he said. I won't run off without you. I ain't out of sorts, she said. You are. You don't want to stay and you don't want to go. Jake looked at her mildly. I've been up that way, he said. It's rough. Why don't we go up to San Antonio and gamble for a spell? Tinkersley took me there, Lorena said. I don't want to go back. You're a hard one to please, Jake said, getting a little testy. I ain't, Lorena said. You pleased me fine. I just want to go to San Francisco like you promised. Well, if you don't like San Antone, there's Austin or Fort Worth, Jake said. There's lots of nice towns that ain't as hard to get to as San Francisco. I don't care if it's hard, Lorena said. Let's just go. Jake sighed and offered her more whiskey. Lay back down, he said. I'll rub you back. I don't need my back rubbed, she said. Lori, we can't leave tonight, he said. I was just offering to be friendly. She had not meant to press him so, but a decision had become important to her. She had spent too many nights in the little hot room they were in. Taking the gritty sheets off the bed made her realize it. She had changed them many times because the men she lay under were as gritty as Jake had been. It was something that had repeated itself once too often, and she was done with it. She wanted to throw the sheets, and maybe the mattress and the bed too, out the window. She was through with the room and everything that went with it. Jake Spoon might as well know it. Honey, you look like you caught a fever, Jake said, not realizing it was a fever of impatience to be done with Lonesome Dove and everything in it. If you're set on it, I reckon we'll go, but I don't think we'll get it in no cow camp. Call wouldn't have it anyway. We can ride with them during the day and make our own camp. Lorena was satisfied. Where they camped made no difference to her. Then Jake started talking about Denver and how when they got there it would be easy to make their way to San Francisco. She only half listened. Jake washed off the best he could in the little wash basin. She had only one spare sheet, so she put it on the bed while he was washing. Let's leave tomorrow, she said. But the herd don't leave till Monday, he reminded her. It ain't our herd, she said. We don't have to wait for it. There was something different about her. Jake had to admit, she had a beautiful face, a beautiful body, but also distance in her such as he had never met in a woman. Certain mountains were that way, like the Bighorns. The air around them was so clear you could ride toward them for days without seeming to get any closer. And yet, if you kept riding, he would get to the mountains. He was not so sure he would ever get to Lori. Even when she took him, there was a distance between them, and yet she would not let him leave. When they blew out the lamp, a shaft of moonlight came in the window and cut across their bodies. Lori let him rub her back, since he enjoyed doing it. She was not sleepy. In her mind, she had already left Lonesome Dove. She was simply waiting for the night to end so they could really leave. Jake got tired of the back rub and tried to roll her over for another poke, but she wouldn't have it. She pushed his carrot away, a response he didn't like at all. "Now, what's the matter now?" he asked. Lori didn't answer. There was nothing to say. He made a second try, and she pushed it away again. She knew he hated to be denied, but didn't care. He would have to wait. Listening to his heavy, frustrated breathing, she thought for a while that he might be going to make a fight of it, but he didn't. His feelings were hurt, but pretty soon he yawned. He kept twisting, turning, hoping she would relent. From time to time, he nudged her hip as if by accident. But he had worked all day, and he was tired. Soon he slept. Lori lay awake, looking out the window, waiting for it to be time to leave.
Chapter 21.
Jake awoke not long after dawn to find Lorena up before him. She sat at the foot of the bed, her face calm, watching the first red light stretch over the mesquite flats. He would have liked to have slept, to hide and sleep for several days, make no decisions, work no cattle, just drowse. But not even sleep was really under his control. The thought that he had to get up and leave town with Lori was in front of his mind, and it melted his drowsiness. For a minute or two, he luxuriated in the fact that he was sleeping on a mattress. It might be a poor one, stuffed with corn shucks, but it was better than he would get for the next several months. For months, it would just be the ground, with whatever weather they happened to catch. He looked at Lori for a minute, thinking that perhaps if he scared her with Indian stories, she would change her mind. But when he raised up on one elbow, took a look at her in the fresh light, the urge to discourage her went away. It was a weakness, but he could not bear to disappoint women, even if it was ultimately for their own good. At least he couldn't disappoint them to their faces. Leaving them was his only way out, and he knew he wasn't ready to leave Lori. Her beauty blew the sleep right out of his brain, and all she was doing was looking out a window, her long golden hair spilling over her shoulders. She wore an old threadbare cotton shift that should have been thrown away long ago. She didn't own a decent dress and had nothing to show her beauty to advantage, yet most of the men on the border would ride 30 miles just to sit in a saloon and look at her. She had the quality of not yet having really started her life. Her face had a freshness unusual in a woman who had been sporting for a while. The thought struck him that the two of them might do well in San Francisco if they could just get there. There were men of wealth there, and Lori's beauty would soon attract them. "You don't look like you've changed your mind," he said. "I guess I got to get up and go buy you a horse." "Take my money," she said. "Don't get one that's too tall." She gave him Gus's $50. "Hell, I don't need all this," he said. "Ain't a horse in town worth $50 unless it's that mare calls. She ain't for sale." But he took the money, thinking it a fine joke on Gus that the money from his coat would buy Lori a mount to ride to Montana, or however far they went. He had known perfectly well Gus would try something of the sort, for Gus would never let him have a woman to himself. Gus liked to be a rival more than anything else, Jake figured. And as for Lori going through with it, well, it relieved him of a certain level of responsibility for her. If she was going to keep that much independence, so would he. Lorena kept looking out the window. It was as if her mind had already left Lonesome Dove and moved up the trail. Jake sat up, put his arms around her. He loved the way she smelled in the mornings. He liked to sniff at her shoulders, her throat. He did it again. She didn't reject these little morning attentions, but she didn't encourage them either. She waited for him to leave and go buy the horse, running over in her mind a few things she could take with her. There was not much. Her favorite thing was a mother-of-pearl comb Tankersley had bought her when they first got to San Antonio. She had a thin gold ring that had been her mother's, and one or two other trifles. She had never liked to buy things. In Lonesome Dove, it didn't matter, for there was nothing much to buy. Jake sat and scratched himself for a while, smelling Lori's flesh and hoping she would encourage him. But since she didn't, he finally got dressed and went off to see about horses and equipment. Before Jake had been gone 10 minutes, Lorena got a surprise. There was a timid knock at her door. She opened it a peek, and there was Xavier Wan standing on the stairs in tears. He just stood there, looking as if it was the end of the world, tears running down his cheeks and dripping onto his shirt. She didn't know what to make of it, but since she wasn't dressed, she didn't want to let him in. "Is it true, what Jake says?" he asked. "Are you leaving today?" Lorena nodded. "We're going to San Francisco," she said. "I want to marry you. Do not go. If you go, I don't want to live. I will burn the place down. It's a filthy place anyway. I will burn it tomorrow." Well, it's your place, she thought. Burn it if you want to. But she didn't say it. He had given her a job when she didn't have a penny, and had paid promptly for whatever services he required. Now he was standing on the stairs, so wrought up he could hardly see. "I'm going," she said. "But Jake is not true," he said. "I know him. He will leave you somewhere. You will never get to San Francisco." "I'll get there," Lorena said. "If Jake don't stay, I'll get there with someone else." He shook his head. "You will die somewhere," he said. "He'll take you the wrong way. We could marry. I will sell this place. We can go to Galveston and take a boat for California. We can get a restaurant there. I have Teresa's money. We can get a clean restaurant with tablecloths. You won't have to see men anymore." "Except I'd have to see you," she thought. "Let me come in," he said. "I will give you anything, more than Gus." She shook her head. "Jake would kill you," she said. "Now you go on now." "I can't," he said, still crying. "I am dying for you. If he kills me, I would be better. I will give you anything." Again, she shook her head, not quite sure what to think. "You should marry me," he said. "I will be good to you. I am not like these men. I have manners. You would see how kind I would be. I would never leave you. You could have an easy life." Lorena just kept shaking her head. The most interesting thing he had said was about the boat. She didn't know much, but she knew Galveston was closer than Denver. Why was Jake wanting to ride to Denver if they could take a boat? "You better leave," she said. "I don't want Jake to catch you up here. He might shoot you." "No, I will shoot him. I have a shotgun. I will shoot him when he comes back if you don't let me in." Lorena hardly knew what to think. It was crazy behavior. He did own a shotgun. It was not likely Jake would let someone shoot him. He already had his Arkansas trouble for shooting someone. They might not get to leave if there was a shooting. Xavier began to pull money out of his pocket. It was hard to say how much he held out to her, but it was a good deal more than $50. It might even be $100. The sight of it made her feel tired. No matter what plans she made or how she tried to live, some man would always be looking at her and holding out money. Without giving it much thought, Mosby had started something that nothing seemed to stop. She thought Jake had stopped it, but he hadn't. His talk about killing men was just talk. If he had cared that much, he would have shot Gus, friend or no friend. "Please, I need you. At least it might calm him down," she thought, opening the door. "I ain't messing this bed," she said. "It's the last sheet." He put the money on her little chest of drawers and turned to her. Lori shut the door and leaned against it, lifting her shift. Soon his legs were trembling so she was afraid he would collapse before he was done. But he didn't. When he finished, he put his head against her bosom for a moment. wetting her breasts with his tears even as she felt his drip on her thigh. Then he stepped back and pulled up his pants. "Goodbye," he said. "Well, I ain't left yet," she said. "We're not going till afternoon." His look startled her. It was like the look in her pa's eyes when he died in Baton Rouge. She watched him go down the stairs. He went slowly, as if feeling for each stair. He had scarcely been in her room 2 minutes, but her shift was wet with tears. Men were all strange. When he finally made it to the bottom, she turned and hid the money. It was just one more secret she had from Jake.
Chapter 22.
Late that afternoon, as the boys were sitting around Bolivar's cook fire getting their evening grub, Augustus looked up from his plate and saw Jake and Lorena ride into camp. They were riding 2 good horses and leading a pack horse. The most surprising thing was Lorena was wearing pants. So far as he could remember, he had never seen a woman in pants, and he considered himself a man of experience. Carl had his back turned and hadn't seen it. Some of the cowboys had. The sight of a woman in pants scared them so bad they didn't know where to put their eyes. Most of them began to concentrate heavily on the beans in their plates. Dish Boget turned white as a sheet, got up without a word to anybody, got his night horse and started out for the herd, strung out up the valley. It was Dish's departure that got Carl's attention. He looked around and saw the couple coming. "We got you to thank for this," he said to Gus. "I admit I was inspired," Augustus said. He knew his friend was in a silent fury, but he himself thought the visit might provide a little amusement. It had been in short supply lately. The only thing that there had been to laugh at was Alan O'Brien getting pitched into a pile of prickly pears by a bronc. When he emerged, he even had thorns in his beard. But that was a normal hazard, the horses being unreliable, prickly pear abundant. A woman in pants was far more unusual. Jake rode right up to the cook fire, though Augustus could tell from his manner he was nervous. "Howdy, boys," he said. "Mind if we make a meal?" "Course not. You're as welcome around here as money, Jake," Augustus said. "You and Laurie, too." Carl watched the proceedings silently, unable to decide who he was more aggravated at, Gus or Jake. Surely the latter knew better than to bring a woman into a cow camp. It was difficult enough to keep men peaceful, even if they didn't have a woman to argue about. "Woodrow, you know Laurie, I reckon," Jake said, although he knew it wasn't true. Carl's silence had always made him nervous. "We've not met," Carl said, touching his hat but not looking at the woman. He didn't want to get angry at Jake in front of all the hands. And all but Dish and the 2 Rainey boys were lounging around eating their evening meal. Or at least they had been lounging. Now they were sitting as stiffly as if they were in church. Some looked paralyzed. For a moment, the only sound in camp was the jingle of a bit as the woman's horse slung its head. Augustus walked over to help Lorena dismount. The sight of the boys all sitting around like statues made him want to laugh. The sudden appearance of a Comanche would not have affected them as much. He recognized the brown mare Laurie rode as having belonged to Mary Pumphrey, the young widow. "I would not have thought Mary would give up her mare," he said. "Jake bought her," Lorena said, grateful that Gus had come over to offer her help. Jake had not so much as looked at her since they rode into camp. She had never seen Captain Carl up close before, but she could tell Jake was mighty uneasy about it. It depressed her a little that she was left to depend on Gus's courtesy from the very outset. He took her over to the cook fire and saw that she got a good help of food, talking casually all the while, mainly about the qualities of the Pumphrey mare. Jake followed and got some grub, and he was silent when he did it. Still, it had felt good to ride out of Lonesome. The dry bean had been empty as they made their preparations. The pants had been Jake's idea. He had known a woman mule skinner in Montana who had worn pants. While Jake had been fixing the pack horse, Lippy had come out on the steps of the saloon and waved his lip at her one more time. "I never told on you, Lori," he said. He looked like he might cry, too. "You'll just have to cry," she thought. He took his bowler off and turned it around his hand until it made her nervous. "You'll have to pardon the grub," Augustus said. "Bull has learned to season, but he forgot to learn to cook." Bolivar was resting comfortably against a wagon wheel and ignored the saddle. He was wavering in his mind whether to stay or go. He did not like to travel. The thought of it made him unhappy. And yet, when he went home to Mexico, he felt unhappy too, for his wife was disappointed in him and let him know it every day. He had never been sure what she wanted. After all, her children were beautiful, but whatever it was, he had not been able to give it to her. His daughters were his delight, but they would soon all marry and be gone, leaving him no protection from his wife. Probably he would shoot his wife if he went home. He had shot an irritating horse right out from under himself. A man's patience sometimes simply snapped. He had shot the horse right between the ears, and then found it difficult to get the saddle off once the horse fell. Probably he would shoot his wife in the same way if he went home. Many times he had been tempted to shoot one or another of the members of the Hat Creek outfit. But of course, if he did that, he would be immediately shot in return. Every day he thought he might go home, but he didn't. It was easier to stay and cut up a few snakes into the cook pot than listen to his wife complain. So he stayed, day by day, paying no attention to what anyone said. That in itself was a luxury he wouldn't have at home, for a disappointed woman was not easy to ignore. Jake ate without tasting his food, wishing he had never come back to Lonesome Dove. It was going to be no pleasure riding north, if Call was so disapproving. He had meant to take Call aside and quietly explain it, but somehow he could not think of the best words to use. Call's silences had a way of making him lose track of his thoughts, some of which were perfectly good thoughts in their way. As they ate, the dusk deepened. John O'Brien on the far side of the herd began to sing his night song, an Irish melody whose words did not carry across the long plain where the cattle stood. But in the still of the night, the sound carried. Somehow it made Newt want to cry. He was sitting stiffly only a few feet from Lorraine. He had been looking at her closely for the first time, hardly daring to, and yet feeling that he was safe because of the dusk. She was more beautiful than he had imagined, but she did not look happy. It gave him a painful feeling to see her unhappiness, and the song made it worse. His eyes filled up. It was no wonder Sean cried so much, Newt thought. His songs made you want to cry even when you couldn't hear the words. "This is a lucky herd," Augustus said. "And how is that?" Jake asked, a little testy. In some moods, he could tolerate Gus's talk, but at other times, the very sound of Gus's voice made him want to take out a gun and shoot the man. It was a loud voice. The sound of it made it hard to think, when it wasn't easy to think anyway. But the most aggravating aspect to it was that Gus always sounded cheerful, as if there was no trouble in the world that could catch him. At times when life seemed all trouble, the sight of Gus, untouched by all that went on around him, was difficult to bear. "Why, it's the only herd on the trail that's got two Irish baritones to sing to it," Augustus said. "He sings too sad," Needle Nelson said, for the sound of Sean's voice affected him as it had Newt. It brought to mind his mother, who had died when he was 8, and also a little sister he had been fond of, who had succumbed to a fever when only 4. "It's the Irish nature," Augustus said. "No, it's just Sean," Alan O'Brien said. "He's just a crybaby." Call came walking over. He felt he had to know what Jake meant to do. "Well, Jake, you made your plans?" he asked, being as formal as possible. Oh, we've decided to try our luck in Denver for the time being, Jake said. I believe we'd both enjoy the cool weather. It's a hard trip, Collins. Why tell that to Jake? Augustus asked. He's a traveled man, ain't put off by hardships. Feather beds ain't his style. He had meant it as blatant irony, since of course feather beds were exactly Jake's style, but the discussion was so solemn that his flourish went unnoticed. We had hoped to sort of ease along with a bunch of you, Jake said, his eyes down. We'll make our own camp, so as not to be in the way. Might could help out a little if things get tight. Water might be a little chancy once we hit the plains. If I'd liked water better, I guess I'd have stayed a riverboater. You boys would have missed out on some choice conversation over the years, Augustus said. Hell, it's taken 10 years off my life listening to you talk, Jake said. Jake, you are surly tonight, Augustus said, mild. I guess leaving the easy pickings around here has put you out of sorts. P.I. was carefully wetting his bowie knife on the sole of one boot, though they were still perfectly safe as far as he knew. P had already begun to have bad dreams about the big Indian whose ferocity had haunted him in his sleep for years. The dreams had been so bad that he had already started sleeping with the unsheathed bowie knife in his hand, so he would be in the habit of it by the time they hit Indian country. This precaution caused certain problems for the young hands, whose duty it was to wake him for his shift at night herding. It put them in danger of getting stabbed, a fact which troubled Jasper Fan particularly. Jasper was sensitive to danger. Usually he chose to wake P by kicking him in one foot, although even that wasn't really safe. P was tall, and who knew when he might snap up and make a lunge. Jasper had concluded that the best way would be to pelt him with small rocks, although such caution would only earn him the scorn of the rest of the hands. I wouldn't have wanted to miss hearing you talk, Gus, he said, though he could not offhand remember a single thing Gus had ever said over the years. But he could remember night after night, drowsing off to the sound of Gus's voice. But I'm ready to start, if we got to start, Augustus said. We got enough cattle now to stock 5 ranches. Call knew that was true, but he found it difficult to resist running over to Mexico every few nights to add more cattle. They were easy to get without Pedro Flores to contend with. It does seem a pity you're so independent, Jake, Augustus said. If you come in with us, you could be a cattle baron yet. No, I'd rather be poor than chew the dust, Jake said, standing up. Lori stood up, too. She felt her silence coming back. It was men watching her while trying to pretend they weren't watching her that brought it on. Few of them were bold enough just to look straight at her. They had to be sneaky about it. Being among them in the camp was worse than the saloon, where at least she had a room. In the camp, there was nothing she could do but sit and listen and talk and pass her by. I guess we'll try to find a ridge to camp on, Jake said. It would be nice to be upwind from these smelly beasts. Good God, Jake, if you're that finicky, you ought to have been a barber, Augustus said. Then you could smell hair oil and toilet water all day and never be offended. He walked over and helped Lorena mount. The brown mare was restless, kept slinging her head. I may take to barbering yet, Jake said, annoyed that Gus had seen fit to help Lori again. She was going to have to learn to mount sometime, with over 1,000 miles of riding ahead. I hope you'll come back for breakfast, Augustus said. We eat about an hour before sunrise. Woodrow Call likes to put in a full day, as you may remember. For that matter, we intend to have our breakfast sent out by the hotel, Jake said sarcastically, spurring his horse. Call watched them go, annoyed. Augustus noticed and chuckled. Even you can't stop inconvenient things from happening, Call. Jake can only be controlled up to a point. And Laura's a woman. She can't be controlled at all. Call didn't want to argue about it. He picked up his Henry, walked out of the circle of firelight, looking to have a few minutes to himself. Passing behind the wagon, he bumped into Newt, who had evidently been holding his water while a woman was at camp, just slipped off to relieve herself. "I'm sorry, Captain," he said. "He ought to go get dished," Carl said. "I don't know why he rode off. It ain't his shift. I guess we'll start tomorrow. We can't take all the cattle in Mexico." He stood silently a moment. The mood to walk had left him. Newt was surprised. The captain never shared his decisions with him, and yet it seemed that the decision to leave had just been made, right there behind the wagon. "Captain," he asked, "how far is it up north?" It was something he couldn't stop wondering about, and since the captain hadn't walked away, the question just popped out. He immediately felt silly for asking it. "I guess it's a mighty far piece up north," he said, as if to relieve the captain of the need to answer. It struck Carl that they should have educated the boy a little better. He seemed to think north was a place, not just a direction. It was another of Gus's failings. He considered himself a great educator, and yet he rarely told anyone anything they needed to know. "It's a ways further than you've been," Carl said, not sure the boy had ever been anywhere. Probably they had at least taken him to Pickles Gap at some point. "Well, I've been north," he said, not wanting the captain to think he was completely untraveled. "I've been north, clear to San Antonio. Remember?" Carl remembered now. Dietz had taken him once. "Where we're going is a sight farther," he said.
Chapter 23.
"Well, I'm going to miss swamps," Gustus said, as he and Carl were eating their bacon in the faint morning light. "Plus, I already missed my Dutch ovens. You would want to move just as my sourdough got right at its prime. I'd like to think that there's a better reason for living in a place than you being able to cook biscuits," Carl said. "Though I admit they're good biscuits." "You ought to admit it. You've had enough of them. I still think we ought to just hire the town and take it with us. Then we'd have a good barkeep and somebody to play the piano." With Carl suddenly determined to leave that very day, Augustus found himself regretful, nostalgic already for things he hadn't particularly cared for, but he would think of losing. "What about the well?" he asked. "Another month and we'd have had it dug." "We?" Carl asked. "When did you hit a lick on that well?" He looked around and saw to his astonishment that Augustus's 2 pigs were laying under the wagon, snuffling. In the half dark, he had thought it was Bolivar snoring. "Who asked them darned pigs?" he said. "I guess to track this," Augustus said. "They are enterprising pigs." "I guess you're planning to take them too." "It's still a free country. They can come if they want the inconvenience. Wonder where Jake camped." At that point, the late shift came riding in. Newt, P., Dish Boget, and Jasper Flint, plus a 5th man who hadn't been part of the shift. "Why, it's Soupy Jones," Carl said. "God almighty," Augustus said. "The man must have lost his wits, what few he had." Soupy had rangered with them a few miles before they quit. He was brave but lazy, a fine card player, and by all odds the best horseman any of them had ever known. His love of being horseback was so strong that he could seldom be induced to dismount, except to sleep or eat. "I thought Soupy married," Carl said, as the boys unsaddled their night horses. "That was the gossip," Augustus said. "Married a rich woman and became a sheriff, I heard. Well, maybe she run off with the preacher. If she didn't, I don't know why he's out here this time of night." Soupy, a short man, came walking over with P.I. "Look what rode up," P.I. said. "I near mistook him for a bandit since it was pitch dark." "Ay, God, Soupy, you should have waited till we lit the lantern. Augustus said, standing up to shake hands. A sharp bunch of gun hands like us, you're lucky not to be shot. Oh, Gus, Soupy said, not knowing what else to say. He had always been nonplussed by Gus's witticism. Morning, Captain, he said. His Carl shook his hand. Have some grub, Carl said. He had always been fond of the man, despite his unwillingness to dismount if there was something to do on the ground. Where'd you come from, Soupy? Augustus asked. Didn't we hear you was mayor of some place, or was it governor? I was just in Bastrop, Gus, Soupy said. Bastrop don't have no mayor, or governor either, barely a town. Well, we're barely an outfit, though we got 2 fine pigs that just joined us last night. Are you looking for employment? Yes. My wife died, Soupy said. She was never strong, he added, in the silence that followed the remark. Well, you're hired, at least, Carl said. I lost 2 wives myself, Augustus remarked. I heard Jake was around, but I don't see him, Soupy said. He and Jake had been close buddies once, and it was partly curiosity about him that made Soupy want to rejoin the Hat Creek outfit. Well, he is, Carl said, not anxious to have to explain the situation. Jake won't camp with us old cobs, Augustus said. He's traveling with the ballet, if you know what I mean. No, but if it's traveling with Jake, I bet it wears skirts, Soupy said. A remark which for some reason seemed to catch everybody wrong, or everybody but Gus, who laughed long and hard, feeling a little confused but happy to have been hired. Soupy went off with P.I. to get breakfast. I'm going in and pry up that sign I wrote so we can take it with us, Augustus said. I may pry up one of my Dutch ovens and bring it too. Bull ain't said that he's going, Carl said. It was a mild anxiety. If Bull quit and they had to depend on Gus to do the cooking, the whole trip would be in jeopardy. Apart from biscuits, his cooking was of the sort that caused tempers to flare. In fact, Bolivar was standing by the cook fire, staring into it with an expression of deep gloom. If he'd heard the remark, he gave no sign. Oh, Bull's got the adventurer's spirit, Augustus said. He'll go, and if he don't, he'll just have to go home and wed his wife more often than he cares to. With that, he went and got the 2 mules that constituted their wagon team. The bigger mule, Greg, was named Greasy, and the smaller, a bay they called Kick.
All right, everyone. I'm gonna go into the stream for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who keeps stopping by. I appreciate all y'all's support. Until next time, everyone, stay safe.